We'll start the meeting now. So firstly, good evening and welcome to the Wokingham Borough Council Planning Committee of the 10th of February, which is being held using Teams video conferencing as we can't meet in person. If I could just quickly whiz through some housekeeping matters, which most of the committee will be familiar with, but possibly some of the outside speakers won't be. The planning committee consists of 11 elected borough councillors. We are supported tonight by a variety of professional council officers. From a legal perspective, we have Sean O'Connor, hopefully here. Good evening, Sean, who's here to represent us, keep us on the straight and narrow on legal matters. We have Callum Wernham, who's the Democratic Services Officer, who's to tonight's meeting. We have Chris Bowring, who's the Vice Chairman of the committee. I'm Simon Weeks, I chair the committee. We also have Justin Turvey, the planning team manager, and Judy Kelly. I think Judy's with us today. Is it Judy or Kirill? Who have we got today?
Yeah, you have Judy.
Judy, sorry, I can't see you. I can only see 9 on my screen. And we have Judy Kelly from Highway, who's the Highways Development Manager. And presenting tonight are the planning officers, and I'll introduce those in turn with each item. The 11 borough councillors who serve on the planning committee represent all 4 political parties on the borough council. It's a quasi-judicial committee with formal set procedures and conduct. The planning officer will present each application. I will then call in turn only those who have pre-registered to speak. There's a time limit of 3 minutes in each category of speaker. So if there's more than one speaker in each category, you will have to share the time. And that means not the first person taking 2 minutes, 58 seconds and leaving the other person with 2 seconds, hopefully. The members of the committee are very much interested in the quality of what you have to say rather than the quantity. So please be sure to get your key points across rather than being cut off in your prime when the 3 minutes is up. Following the planning officer's presentation, the comments of the registered speakers, the planning committee members will then consider, question and seek clarification for the applications and hopefully reach a decision, which may or may not agree with the planning officer's recommendation in front of us this evening. Finally, a reminder, our role is to determine each planning application and ensure it's valid, and we have to simply apply prevailing local and national planning policies and previous binding decisions of the independent planning inspectorate. Our role as the planning committee is not to suggest alterations to planning applications, modifications, whether they're a good idea, whether they are needed, whether they're value for money, whether they're too costly, whether there are alternative uses for the site, etc. So our role is to determine what is in front of us, and if we find it acceptable, it will be approved, and if we don't, it is likely to either be refused or deferred. So without further ado, we'll go straight on to the first item on the agenda, which is land between Jubilee Avenue and Martins Drive, and relates to a proposed creation of a parcel.
Sorry, Simon.
Yep.
There's several other agenda items first. Apologies, minutes, declarations of interest.
Yes, apologies. Out of practice, we didn't do this in January, did we? So, okay. I believe there are no apologies.
That's correct, Simon.
That's correct.
And could I ask whether any members have a declaration of interest or a conflict with any of the items tonight?
Gary here, Simon. I do have a comment to make on page 25.
Could you be a bit more specific, Gary?
Yeah, page 25, line 50. Carl Doran did not participate in discussions or vote on the application, having been present at the previous committee meeting where the item had been previously discussed. The case officer said, I will just quickly go through the presentation again at the meeting that Carl did attend. It's not a specific interest with respect to him, but it's the principle here that if a member is late for a meeting and that meeting has already started, in this case no vote was ever taken, does that preclude that actual planning committee member from being a participant in that debate? Or where do you draw the line? If you're 5 minutes late, you can't be involved. If you miss the whole meeting, you can be involved, although no vote has been taken. I just need clarification, please.
Okay, well, that clarification, if we're able to secure it, is going to come from Sean O'Connor, who is the borough solicitor in a position to advise us. Sean, I'm not sure whether you're expected to have to adjudicate on this, but would you be able to make some comments, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just flicking to the relevant part of the planning guidelines and good practice. Can't quote you the exact paragraph at the moment, but it does say here that that the members should be in attendance for the entirety of the application. So that includes the officer's presentation.
Okay, thank you. Gary, does that provide the clarification you needed?
Well, yes, it just means that if any of us on the planning committee are 5 minutes late connecting to the planning committee, then we can't be involved in that debate, and we can't vote on that particular item. That's clearly what he said, and I accept that. That's fine.
All right, thank you. So I think we've covered that, and I assume, Callum, I've not been notified of any items to be deferred or withdrawn.
No, Chair.
Okay.
Interest, Simon.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Two more people have indicated.
Yes, sure. So Stephen first.
Thank you, Simon. I really need to make a statement. It's not really a declaration of interest, but it's a statement to clarify matters and in the interest of transparency. I began the campaign to secure a new library in Twyford 20 years ago. I've continued to be a strenuous advocate of a new library in all my time as a councillor. Even so, I do not believe my commitment to a new library constitutes an interest, either personal or financial, that prevents me from commenting and voting on item 55 of tonight's agenda. I will assess the application in purely planning terms, as all members of the planning committee are obliged to do, and my vote will be cast on the basis of my assessment of all the evidence presented to the committee. I should add that I have discussed this matter already with Sean to get his clearance that this is an acceptable position, and he has given that.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. I think I concur with your statement in as much as it covers you from being quite free to make a decision and approach this with an open mind. Now we have one other person who else is indicating to speak. Pauline.
Thank you, Chairman. It's the same item, actually. I was the exec member responsible for libraries and very heavily involved in the project when the site was identified, which is now part of the planning application. However, I haven't been involved in the project for 2 years, as I'm not now any longer the portfolio member for libraries. So I've got an open mind in the proposal, and I will consider it purely on its planning merits and what's said tonight by parties and debate by members. So okay. I've also talked to Sean about my interest, and I think I'm okay to continue.
I concur. And anyone else? No. Right. So back to where I falsely started.
Sorry, Simon. Minutes.
My apologies, folk. I'm not sure whether I'm. It's the excitement of having such high-speed broadband. I'm not sure my brain's keeping up. Okay. Firstly, were there any? You would have all seen copies of the minutes, but were there any suggested changes on the minutes, other than the clarification that Gary Cowan has just drawn to our attention? Pauline, your hand is up. Thank you.
Sorry, it's a residual.
Right, I see no one else indicating. So therefore, when I'm allowed to physically sign the minutes, I shall do so. And that pile is growing by the month. Right, we will now move on to the first item on the agenda, which relates to a path creation order relating to a proposed bridleway in Wokingham Town. And I'd invite Andrew Fletcher to give us a brief presentation on this matter. Thank you, Andrew. Over to you.
Good evening, Chair. Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen where I've got the presentation ready. Make sure I select the right one. and hopefully that has come through okay now. So this is a request for the committee to consider making a path creation order to create a new bridleway on land adjacent to Jubilee Avenue in Wokingham. The reason for the bridleway is to facilitate the creation of the Greenway Route B, which runs from Cantley Park to Arborfield Cross, as we have not been able to ascertain a landowner of certain parts of the land and secure a path through agreement as we normally would do. And I'll just advance the screen. Here is the line of the proposed path creation order, and it's required to run along unregistered land in order to construct the greenway, and it will complete a small gap in the larger route. Because part of the land is unregistered, we're unable to establish the landowner. A solution to this issue would be for the committee to consider using the council's powers to create a new path under section 26 of the Highways Act 1980. Under this section, the council is able to create a new bridleway if it is satisfied that the path or way would add to the convenience or enjoyment of a substantial section of the public. The path will allow the creation of an off-road multi-user route, which will allow pedestrians and cyclists to avoid the need to negotiate the busier sections of Clifton Road where it meets Holt Lane and avoid the on-road parking area that's adjacent to Joel Park. As part of and this is a section of where it meets in context. As part of the whole greenway, it will provide an extension of the route from Cantley Park and provide safe off-road access for cyclists and pedestrians looking to pass to and from Cantley Park and the wider Sangs areas to the north and also further south towards Arborfield Cross. This has been a long-term strategic objective of the council, and it contributes to the climate change agenda and the sustainable transport objectives. It would add significantly to the convenience or enjoyment of a substantial section of the public. As detailed in the report, it's considered that the tests of section 26 of the Highways Act have been met and that it's expedient that the path or way should be created. And I recommend that the order is made. The extent of the bridleway utilises, as I've shown before, I'll just go back. The bridleway will utilise this, or the greenway will utilise this path here, but it will also continue to the west over land owned by Wokingham Town Council. A long-term permitted path agreement will be used to secure this section of the route, and we're looking for the path creation order for the other section. As I mentioned before, in context, it's a small link within a large wider route. This slide shows the details and the route in context of the land ownership, and it highlights the unregistered section of land that's the particular issue. Wokingham Borough Council own this section, this bit is unregistered, and then Wokingham Town Council own this part. Okay. Here is an extract from the feasibility design, and it highlights how the design of the path will avoid any of the large mature trees in the area. No tree over 3 inch of trunk size diameter will be affected. We will use no-dig construction techniques to avoid any adverse impact on any tree roots, and the surface material that we'll put down for the greenways is permeable, which means that any existing surface water supply to the trees will not be affected. These pictures show the area in question with an indicative sketch line of how the path will run through the land from the western and the eastern entrances. And you can also see the line of cars that normally form adjacent to Joel Park on that side. And here's a second picture with further pictures of the route as it will go through the centre here, and a indicative picture at some point in the route to show how the land looks at the present time in between the trees. And that's all I have on my presentation here. And it's just over to the committee to see if there's any questions.
Right. Thank you very much, Andrew. Get the speaker back on. Could we lose the presentation now, please?
I am just looking to see how I do it. Sorry about this. There we are.
Right. Thank you, Andrew. So this application, as you will have seen from the report, members, has has not generated any reaction from all those consulted. They've either chosen not to respond or they don't have concerns with it. It's a very important link in creating one of the new routes we've created across the borough, the greenways, which are proving very popular. Obviously, we didn't realise how popular they would prove because I don't know now, but I think during COVID, there's far more people out on foot or on bicycle, which this route will allow. So I can see, firstly, do we have a relevant town member? I don't think, Malcolm, you're not a member for this area, are you? No. So we'll come first to Rochelle, who was indicating, and then to Angus.
I have two questions. One, the land wasn't actually unregistered. It belonged to Woking Town Council for a long time, and apparently somehow or another disappeared from the registration. So I'm sure the Town Council would still be happy to do this, but it would be nice to acknowledge that and to make sure that none of the Jubilee oaks will be damaged in the process, because they were done for the Jubilee of a previous king. And that's the only things that I have to say.
Okay, I think Andrew has quite clearly laid out that through using a no-dig approach, they will be very cautious and using permeable material as well. That will do the utmost to retain the better specimens of the larger specimens of trees there without putting them at risk.
And a greenway is very good as well.
Angus Ross.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, delighted this has come forward to make that little link that otherwise would be just landowners' consent. It clearly meets all the criteria, and I'm delighted that no significant trees will be lost as a result of this. It's a sort of scrubby bit of land. I have looked at it. My only little question is really the procedure after here. We have to go out and see if there are objections. Is it that anybody that made any response to the consultation would have to make new representation once this goes out, and there's nothing, as it were, brought forward from the previous consultation?
I'll just answer that now. Effectively, yes, they would have to make any new representations. The criteria for the order has to really be objections based on the impact that they might have on land that they would have a legal interest in. So they would have to show an interest in the land and that interest has been impacted by the order. It's not the same as normal diversion orders or other path orders, where it could be on the grounds that they don't like it. They have to actually have a reason why they're objecting.
Thank you for that clarity, Andrew.
Okay. Malcolm Richards.
Yes, a slightly similar sort of point, really, and clarification of something. I was on the town council when that piece of land came up several years ago. It was actually, part of that local area. Everybody was happy with it. And then when someone went through records, they discovered that little bit of land, well, not necessarily that small, but that bit of land didn't actually have any owners and details around there. And so they were not interested in doing anything on it because they didn't want to be challenged and have to go and do a lot of activity. So it was sort of town, but then they relinquished it when they couldn't find any owner. I think this is actually a good scheme. Obviously, these greenways and bridleways are of definite benefit, have been used a lot recently. I have no objection to this at all.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, there is one. If somebody, after we've done this, if somebody then turns up, they've been living in Canada for donkey's years, they didn't know about it, do they have to challenge, or do we have to tell them, or do we have to change the route? What basically would happen?
The path creation order process allows for a 6-week period of for representations to be received. Yeah. By landowners. It is advertised in newspapers and a site notice is placed on site. After that, if there's no objections, the council can confirm the order and the path is made. There is a period of 6 months where people could look at whether we followed the right legal processes and other elements like that. But
I was thinking more if somebody turns up in 2 years' time with a bit of paper that says this is all my land, that sort of thing, like 2 years down. Do we have to change the route, or?
No, effectively the bridleway is created over the land and they've lost their opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Stephen Conway, and then Pauline Jorgensen and Gary Cowan. So Stephen.
Thank you very much, Simon. My point really was that I think we don't need to have any qualms about approving this order, because the order allows any potential landowner who we don't know about to emerge and challenge this. That's part of the process, and in which case there would be a stage of appeal effectively to a higher authority. So I think we can, with a clear conscience, without any concern about infringing on the rights of an unknown landowner, actually approve this, and I will be certainly doing so.
Okay, thank you. Pauline Jorgensen.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks, Andrew. I'm very much in favour of the work you're doing on greenways and the way all these things are starting to link up. So that's great. Well done. Thank you. A question about gear change. Obviously, this predates that, and I'm just wondering whether there is any opportunity to include some of the gear change requirements, which will become requirements when we adopt it, in terms of separating the traffic and that sort of thing.
Is this the new standards that have been published? This actually does comply with them, because part of the new standards advocate a move from off-road to off-road cycle routes rather than shared cycle footways, and this is what this actually provides, so it enables us to comply with those standards.
Yeah, I think the standard, I agree, and I think that's great. I'm very, very keen to have cycleways and footpaths separate from the road. The one I wasn't quite so sure about is how you separate walking traffic from bicycles.
That's tricky. The greenways are not designed to be segregated routes, and if I'm honest, in my experience, I've found that the segregating of the routes, unless it's done physically, doesn't tend to happen in practice. What I have got is the Highways Design have done the feasibility design and are obviously aware of the new standards. They will design any new route to comply as much as we can with the new standards.
So maybe, Simon, I don't know whether it'd be worth putting an informative on there or something, just to ask them to go as far as they can to meet the new standards.
Well, I think Andrew has already confirmed that they are complying with the new standards.
No, he hasn't. He complies with one of them, but not the other. It complies with the separation of.
I think that because this predates the new standards, I would be not keen to do that, Pauline.
I'd like to make sure that the design goes as far as possible in that direction.
Okay, well, we'll come back to that then. So we've got a query on that. Now, Gary Cowan, please. Hello, Gary.
I'm just trying to find my mute button. The wife finds it very easily, but I have difficulty. I'm very supportive of this, so I don't have a problem with it. It's more some really minor technical points, if I could call them that. On page 29, there's an application number and it says not applicable, an expiry date, parish, and the ward is mentioned. That's the only thing. We do, if we cut down a TPO tree or whatever, we do give it a reference number. And I think a reference number would be helpful, only because this is only part of the route, and there will be other elements of the route coming up further. So if there was some sort of a reference, then at least when we move to the next phase, people will be in a position to be able to refer to the whole package. I mean, and the other issue is, I think it was Andrew alluded to, that these points, if anybody wants to submit comments on future elements of the route, they would have to resubmit comment. And I mean, I just picked up on page 57, there was a bit on to do at Mall Road and a crossing. And then on page 84, there was a reference made by a resident to School Road. And I must say the consultation report is extensive and it's very, very good. But the point I would suggest maybe that the officers might want to look at an action plan to deal with the points that are just cursorily referred to and passed over, and then they be kept as an action plan. So the next time we look at the next phase of it, those missing points are dealt with because there's an action plan in place to deal with them, rather than just write it all away and everybody has to resubmit all the comments again. It seems a terrible waste of resource, having created a superb consultation exercise. That's me, Don. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. I'd ask Andrew perhaps just take those comments on board for future consultations. Before we come back to Pauline's request for an informative, is there anybody else wishing to speak on this item? I don't see anyone else indicating. So, Pauline.
I've got Abdul and
Oh,
I believe
I did have my
Rochelle's
hand
put her hand up again.
Sorry, I can't see those people or their hands. Therefore, Abdul next, please. Good evening, Abdul.
Good evening, and thank you, Chairman. I am fully supportive of this application, which is marvelous to see is expanding. Just one clarification. You did mention in your summary that it may have to go to Secretary of State for confirmation. If we do prove it, will it still have to go, or we can just call it a day and say it's done under Section 26 Highway Act?
The process is that if there's an objection that's not subsequently withdrawn, the council's not able to confirm the order itself and then must refer it to the Secretary of State to make the final determination. And it's the way that the structure is made. Before it does do that, the council does have a choice to either abandon the order or to refer it up, but it can't overrule any objections.
I see there's 12% objection. That's why I refer this question to you.
Okay. Well, the order would actually only apply, and the right of objection only actually applies to the actual route that's being created, so the bridleway. So it wouldn't be an objection, wouldn't be valid on the entire route. Whereas people could object to this on the basis of an irrelevant part, so object on, say, Cantley Park, object to this order due to Cantley Park, they would actually run the risk of costs against them because it wouldn't be a relevant legal objection.
So any objection would have to be specifically about the element of the route that we're talking about here, which is a very small part of the overall greenway that's proposed.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman.
All right. And Rochelle, you wanted to come back?
Yes, I'd like to agree with Pauline's informative and second it if we need a seconder. Because I think it's a very good idea.
I think we need to agree some wording before we start agreeing with something here. So, Pauline, could you just clarify what sort of wording you'd like in this informative? And the second point I just need to go, because this is not a conventional planning application with conditions attached, are we able to issue an informative? Could either Justin or Sean clarify that?
We wouldn't be issuing a planning decision as such, so we'd have to pass that informative on to the Green Infrastructure team effectively for them to act on.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So, Pauline.
Thank you, Chairman. What I would suggest is, I'm sure somebody can put it in better English than me, but a request to the Green Infrastructure team that when they're designing this Greenway section, that they try and meet as many of the gear change objectives, including the separation of cycleway from footway, as possible, given the constraints of the site and also the constraints of any other considerations that they've got.
Okay, all right. And I think, Rochelle, you indicated you'd second that. So I can't, a couple more people waiting to speak, but I can't imagine that, well, perhaps you could at least all confirm by raising your hand that you're happy to adopt that informative, and then we'll come on to the remaining speakers.
Simon, may I just make a quick comment before we go to a vote on that? Okay. It's merely to say that I don't actually think an informative, using the word an informative, is appropriate. I think all we need to do, personally, is record in the minutes that the committee requests the Green team, Green Route team, to take these points on board. I'm not sure. I mean, I thought an informative, was very much tied to a planning application, as Justin was saying, and I'm not sure we can actually have an informative.
Okay, that was my earlier comment, that since it isn't a planning application with conditions where you would then normally supplement them potentially with informatives, there are no conditions. So I think your suggestion is a good one, and I think we'll still go to the intention is that this matter is drawn to the attention of the Green team, And I think we've done that very clearly tonight, and it will be recorded in the minutes as such. Could members please indicate then, as I previously requested, that whether they would support this proposal? That is the informative. Right, that is clearly carried. Any members wishing to, could you put your hands down? Any members wishing to vote against this informative? I see nobody indicating. Right, we have Andrew Mickleborough wishing to speak. Andrew, good evening.
Yes, good evening. Actually, my point has been answered now, so thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else needing to speak, or can we now confirm this matter? Anyone else indicating, Callum?
No, Chair.
Okay. In that case, members, I draw your attention to the recommendation on page 29 and 30 of your agenda, which is 3 specific recommendations as part of this. Could you please raise your hand to indicate that you support this?
Chairman, can I just ask, do we have someone to propose that motion and second it, or are we taking that from the amendment?
Sorry, are we talking about the overall thing or the amendment?
The overall, so the recommendation now.
No, I think we need to confirm the overall recommendation, which is what we're trying to do now.
Okay. So sorry, Chairman. Ordinarily, you'd have someone propose the recommendation, then second it.
No, we don't do that on planning.
Okay.
We have a recommendation in front of us, and if it's not challenged, that's the one that we put to the vote, and it's not proposed and seconded. Okay. All right. So members, could you please, as I say, indicate whether you can support that? And I believe that is unanimous. Thank you very much, members. So Andrew, you have your, hopefully, subject to no objections, you have your missing link in this essential and very important, and I think what will become a very valued Greenaway.
Thank you very much.
We could now jump forward to page 107 of your agenda, which is the application at the Old School Hall in High Street, Twyford, which of course is a Wokingham Borough Council application. And that application tonight is being presented by Simon Taylor. And we also have a number of speakers registered to give us their views on this now. So without further ado, Simon, are you present, hopefully?
Thank you, Chair, I am.
Simon, if you lead us straight in then, thank you.
Application 2010-22 relates to the old Polehampton School. I will bring up the screen here for you to. It's a former boys' school dating back from 1877. It's laid vacant for several years. It's owned by the Polehampton Trust, last used as a theatre. It sits on the western edge of the Twyford town centre and the conservation area. The rail line running, the Henley to Twyford rail line running along its western edge. This plan here just shows you the context of the brown being the listed buildings within the site and surrounding sites, the purple being the conservation area, sorry, the yellow being the conservation area and the purple being the town centre. The application involves 2 phases. The site plan here shown is indicates the 2 phases. The first phase involves the renovation and restoration of the listed building on the right for use as a community library, Twyford Library, which is relocating from across the road in Polehampton Close. It will also include a children's library and a children's activity centre at the rear. In internal works involve works to the roof and internally. There's no significant external works. Access will be from the side of the building with an extension to the rear. After phase 1, phase 2 involves the extension of a 2-storey extension for the use as a community centre and a cafe. The intent behind phase 2 is to connect in with phase 1, as you see on the plan here, but at the same time, phase 1 will come forward. It has funding that's from the council in support with the Polehampton Trust. Phase 2 at the moment does not have funding, so phase 1 can operate independently of phase 2. Landscaping being an example that it will be landscaped appropriately. All the finishes will take account of that. A previous application from 2015 proposed a largely identical scheme with its listed building consent for a 2-storey re-extension as well and the use of the library. It expired in November of 2020, primarily because of funding issues. The council then has, as I've previously indicated, sought to finance phase 1, with Polehampton Trust keen to advance phase 2 when the funding does come about. No objections were received to the application. The Parish Council, Twyford Parish Council, did support the application, subject to ensuring that their access details are sufficient. As you see on the site plan here, there is level access from Polehampton Close into phase 1, and it will continue into phase 2 at a lower level further down. The primary issues with the application are 3 issues. The impact upon the listed building. There is identified as being some less than substantial harm. Amendments have been made to this scheme, including the loss of the removal of solar panels that were proposed to the roof of the listed building. They have been removed to this roof plane here. They've been removed on heritage concern grounds. There are also ecological concerns with bat roosts. There are bat roosts identified in the building and in the adjacent toilet block, which is on the right of this photograph. The complication with that is that then to provide bat roosts in the future in the redesign of the building, that needs to be done sympathetically within the listed building. So those details will be forthcoming as a pre-commencement addition. The final issue is the issue with the loss of the sycamore tree. It will only become impacted on phase 2 of the development with its removal. You can see the extent of the tree there. It has been identified as potentially being listed as a veteran tree. There's some debate on that. It is not a veteran tree, but it is, in the Trees Officer's view, worthy of retention based on those grounds. But they have, on balance, accepted that the removal of that tree. Other secondary issues, there are issues with parking in terms of shortfall in parking, but that's numerical only. There is a car park at the rear of the site that will be utilised. You will have disabled parking and electric vehicle parking. So in summary, the public benefits being the restoration of the listed building, the provision of the community facility, are seen to outweigh any of these the identified harm in terms of the tree impacts and the heritage impacts. It also proposes a community facility in the future that will be beneficial for the community. Conditions that I do draw your attention to in the agenda are landscape conditions 4 to 8. Conditions 4 and 5 being the most prominent ones. So the Land Trees Officer is keen to establish a fairly extensive landscaping scheme to compensate for the loss of the sycamore tree and to provide a suitable landscape strategy within the building, between the building and the car park. Heritage conditions 9 to 11, probably the most important one there is condition 10, which does seek to get further details about the relationship of the works within the listed building, how they were going to insulate the building and the external brickworks and everything else. Those works will be encompassed in a listed building consent, which would be determined concurrently following this application, if it were to be determined as an approval. Ecological conditions are in 12 and 13. Condition 13 primarily requires bat boxes as biodiversity enhancement details, just to work out the concept of how they would be achieved within the listed building. Subject to those conditions, the application is recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. Now, members, it's very confusing. I have 6 people with their hands up. if you're wishing to speak on this item, this is not the time to be putting your hands up. Do you all have a point of order or something you need to draw to my attention? Fine, thank you. Can we put our hands up once we've heard the officer's presentation and those of all the external speakers? Because it's very confusing, because I'm not aware when all the hands go up whether somebody's missing part of the presentation or has a specific point they need to draw to our attention. I think all the hands are now down. Thank you for your cooperation on that. So we now come to the registered speakers, and the first registered speakers are those representing the applicant, which, as I've mentioned, is the council, who are Councillors John Halsall and Councillors Wayne Smith, who will have to share their 3-minute time. Over to whichever of you is speaking first.
Thank you, Simon, and good evening, everyone. I don't think John's going to speak this evening. I think he's allowing me to have his 1.5 minutes. It's been quite a journey. Hopefully this evening you will approve our new library in Twyford. I must say a few thank yous, especially for Simon Taylor, for getting us to this point with the application. It's been quite a journey. Also, many thanks to Mark Redfern for the last 2 years, has guided us through with support from Tim Searle and Richard Alexander. I couldn't go without mentioning David Turner from the Trust, who has constantly over the last 2 years put pressure on John Halsall and myself to bring this to fruition. With that, I'm not going to say any more. I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to leave it in your capable hands. So thank you very much, Simon.
Okay, thank you. John, did you wish to speak or not?
How long have I got?
We've probably got 1.5 minutes at least, I would think.
So
Wayne was
just
very
over
good.
2 minutes.
Tonight, I'm delighted. Tonight, I'm delighted to support the Polehampton Tribal Library planning application, creating a beautiful building in the village centre. It has been a long journey, but highly enjoyable over many years, working with a team that rescued the Twyford Youth Centre. David Turner has been a nightmare, badgering me constantly. James Ford was the genius who suggested the current scheme. John Jarvis was firm and hard-working, and Andrew Cardy has been patient, constant, supportive and understanding. With Wayne Smith, I've been in a position to make it happen and obtain the council's approval to spend $697,000 on the project, which will give no financial benefit to the borough, but be a real boon to the village. I'm grateful for the Twyford Borough Councillors and Parish Council's passive support. It shows that the Conservative administration works for the whole borough. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you, John. If I could now invite Lindsay Ferris, who will be addressing us as Twyford ward member.
Good evening, everyone. I should be relatively short. I would like to thank Dave Turner. He put the original proposals for this site together quite a few years ago and was instrumental in getting it moved forward again with Twyford Together. And I'm very pleased that we've got to that stage. I fully support this planning application. It will provide a much wanted community facility in Twyford and will also enable a Grade 2 listed building to be put back into use, which has been very much underutilised for many years. I do have a couple of questions or points. One is about the car parking, and that is, would some of the parking be specific for library use? Because there is a Wokingham Borough Council car park directly behind. And secondly, I was told at some point that the toilets were going to be replaced. Is that a phase 2 issue because they're demolishing it at phase 2? And is that included or not? Because I haven't, I can't quite work out from it. But I absolutely fully support it. My colleague Stephen has mentioned he's been pushing for it for 20 years, and in the village, many residents come up to both Stephen and I, ask how this is progressing. So I think it's something that the community in Twyford really want. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. So I think that concludes those that are registered to speak. And as is customary, When I throw it open to the committee, I will of course come to Stephen Conway, because it's customary to go to the ward member first if the application is there. And I trust, Stephen, we're going to hear equally enthusiastic comments from yourself.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Obviously, in light of my statement earlier, I'm going to play this straight down the line as a planning application that I, as a member of the planning committee, must assess and come to a balanced conclusion on. But I cannot deny that I'm very pleased to see an application relating to Twyford Library before us. One thing that the committee does need to bear in mind, that this is essentially an application to renew consent that the council granted to a different applicant, the Polehampton Trust, in October 2016. It's before us this evening only because the new applicant is the council itself. I would also like to draw colleagues' attention to the planning history and in particular encourage them to note that this building has served as a library on a temporary basis before, and it was given outline consent to be a library as long ago as 1966. So there is some kind of precedent for regarding this as a suitable site. Simon Taylor, the planning officer, not Simon Weeks, the chairman. Simon's pointed out that the application involves minor harm to the listed building, would cause disruption to the bats and the regrettable loss of a mature sycamore tree. But he concludes that these disadvantages are more than offset by the community benefit of the scheme, both in terms of the reuse of a really important listed building and obviously in terms of the provision of a new and improved library facility in Twyford to replace the temporary huts that were put up many decades ago and were assumed to have a short lifespan, but they've clung on for a lot longer. Simon's balanced assessment is my view exactly. I believe that the community benefit significantly offsets the disadvantages. A new library for Twyford has been a community aspiration for 20 years. As someone who began the campaign and who has submitted numerous public petitions on the subject, I can testify to the strong local support for a new library. I hope all members of this committee will feel able to support the officer recommendation and give the application their approval. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. I think in view of the comments you've just made and the summary of Simon Taylor's presentation, I suspect there's nobody on this committee who would be expecting us to be sitting in front of a recommendation for approval for this application if it was purely for commercial residential gain. It's clearly the community benefits that accrue from this that allows the council's officer to come up with a balanced recommendation that does recognise the loss of the tree, but it does, of course, also protect a listed building which would probably potentially fall into greater disrepair over time to the detriment of the listed building. So I think that's very encouraging. We'll come on to other speakers now. The first I have on my list is Andrew Mickleborough. Good evening, Andrew.
Yes, thank you. Sorry. Yes, thank you, Simon. The thanks given tonight by Wayne, John and Lindsay to the many people involved in bringing this application to us tonight were heartfelt, and they reflect the great merits of this project. I do have two very small questions, one of which Lindsay touched upon in his comments, and it's about the existing toilet block. Can officers confirm if the existing toilet block is currently in use? There's reference on page 131 stating that full accessibility, quote, appears to be assured as part of phase 1 and is assured during phase 2. If for any reason public toilet facilities are not available throughout each phase, are there other nearby accessible options? The second question comment is that I note that there's provision of one EV charging point. I'm wondering whether we might consider an informative that when that EV charging point is being installed, that this is done in such a way that other EV points could easily be added at some point in the future. Thank you.
All right. I think it would be appropriate that we, whilst we've got them, we get questions to the points you've raised and, of course, the points that Councillor Ferris made. So, Simon, there was a reference to the issue about parking for the library, whether the toilets are currently in use. I think I understood them not to be, and whether there will be any alternatives provided. And picking up on Andrew's last point, whether we're able to have passive EV installation in the event of there being a greater demand than the one that we're currently proposing to install. Would you try and address those?
Yes, I can. The toilets, I understand, are closed at the moment. They are intended to be refurbished as part of phase 1 and then demolished as part of phase 2. So they'll be in use when phase 1 comes around. I think the closure at the moment might be because of COVID issues or maybe run down. I'm not quite sure. But once they're refurbished, they're intended to be reused.
They've been closed a long time.
Yep. Okay.
Sorry, go.
Okay. The issue about parking for the library.
Yeah, the parking. If I just bring up the plan again, bear with me. Sorry. That'll be too much effort. Sorry. The red line plan only extends to the edge of the car park, so it includes one car space for the electric vehicle charging point. So any parking beyond that is not within the scope of the application. So when it comes to dealing with whether the parking is assigned to the library or whether the accessible parking is provided nearer to the library, that has to be dealt with outside of the scope of the application. The council's aware of that. That will be dealt with in due course. Again, electric vehicle charging can easily be accommodated within the vicinity of the existing car space that is proposed under this application. But that's the council approach will follow as part of the development anyway.
Thank you, Simon. So, in essence, because the red line only includes one parking space, I think we have to leave those questions to be answered another time, or otherwise we would risk delaying a decision on this long-awaited application. So, thank you. To Pauline Jorgensen next.
Thank you, Simon. I just have to switch a few things on and off. Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to see this coming forward as well, and I think Dave Turner does deserve a lot of credit for the amount of effort he's put into moving this forward and getting to a successful conclusion. My question about this was actually about the old library site. I note the red boundary of the new site doesn't include that, and I was just wondering what's happening to that. Is it being shut? Is it being demolished? Is that a separate application?
Is it possible we could, obviously that's not relevant to this application, but is it possible we could have a brief answer from somebody on that?
My answer will be pretty brief. I'm not sure what's happening with it. It is a much smaller building, so it would be council owned, so they'll, I guess, put it out for rental for future purposes. I'm not sure. So
yeah, the reason I'm asking, Simon, is the parking elements.
Yeah.
At the moment it's shared parking.
I understand that, but it is outside of the scope of what we're considering tonight.
If I may just quickly comment, Simon, I understand that it may well be the case that the existing library is demolished and the space created is given over to additional car parking.
That's what I was hoping, Stephen.
Okay, well, that's great if they can achieve that, but it won't be directly as part of this scheme and phase 1. Okay, there must be others waiting to speak, but I'm afraid I can't see any further people. Callum, could you prompt me?
Yes, let me just get the order up.
I think Rochelle,
yes,
or Abdul.
Yeah, Rochelle and Abdul, and then it's Gary, Angus, and Chris.
Thank you. Thanks. So, Rochelle.
I'd like to also thank Stephen and Lindsay's hard work at this, and Dee Tomlin as well. I'm very happy that the borough has finally found the money to put the library there. For a long time, we were talking about, there was a talk about building a bathroom in this area, a toilet with a library around it, because the library was in such poor shape. I think this is a fantastic work by the local Twyford councillors to finally get something that's really needed, and they should get full credit for it.
Okay, thank you, Rochelle. Abdul Loys.
Thank you, Chair. I'm delighted to see this is happening, and I would just like to thank Winesmith, Jones, and Lindsay, and particularly all the officers involved. They have done wonderful things here. I think people in Twyford will be very proud to see the investment has been put in the village. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Gary Cowan.
Thank you, Simon. Going back in time when Stephen was a young boy, I remember talking about this particular thing, and it's certainly gone on for over 20 years. I'm quite happy to support it. But that's not the points I want to raise. One point which I suppose the officers could clarify is why does the Environment Agency not appear in the statutory consultees? And that's just one of the points. And the other point is the loss of the sycamore. I mean, it's an 11-metre high TPO tree, and I'm very uncomfortable with it when officers use the term on balance. And the reason I say that, sorry, the reason can I continue?
Yes, please do.
Oh, thank you. The reason I would say that is that one thing we don't get with these plans anymore is physical pictures of the sites. So we can't look at a picture when we're going through our documents and saying, oh, there's that and there's that. And a picture of the site and a picture of the Sycamore tree, so you could see the relationship of one to the other, would be helpful. I don't know if so my wife's shouting to see if I'm still alive. I don't know whether it's the easy option to cut the tree down, whether the tree could be pollarded, whether a building could be moved or anything. It's just the easy out option on balance. Having said that, I will support the application.
Okay, right. Did you conclude there, Gary?
Yeah, I just want the point of why the EEA were not statutory consultees in this application.
Okay, Simon Taylor, would you be able to clarify that, please?
I missed which statutory consultee was
the Environment Agency.
Environment Agency. My understanding would be that that's only required where there's a flooding issue. In this case, there wasn't. So, is the consultee for the issue in relation to the tree? Is it, or I'm not sure.
No, I think the tree was a separate item. I know from correspondence with Gary recently, it's the Environment Agency's contributions is a matter of interest to him. So I think that's correct, isn't it, Gary? Why there wasn't a response to them. I was wondering whether it was because it was largely a redevelopment, exclusively largely a redevelopment of an existing building. But if you're not able to answer, I guess you're not able to answer, and we'll have to make the decision.
Sorry, Simon, I'll just jump in. They're just not a statutory consultee for this application on flood risk or on site area, so that we wouldn't have a reason. Then they wouldn't be. So we don't have a reason to consult them.
Okay, thank you very much.
So sorry, Simon, can I confirm then that it, as appears in another planning application further on, that if it's flood zone 1 or 2, there's no requirement for the Environment Agency to be a statutory consultant. That's what I'm reading from this and the next planning application. Can just confirm that?
Yeah, I can. If it's not a major.
Hang on, Justin. Gary, I'm very keen that we don't blur this with other applications. The question needs to relate to this. We can cover the point again on another application, but on this item, we have confirmation from the development manager that there is not required that the Environment Agency is a consultee because of the scale of this scheme. So if you have a point about that on another scheme, let's discuss that when we get there, rather than confuse the two issues.
That doesn't answer the point. The point is very clearly, were the Environment Agency not consulted because A, it was another scheme, there was a building on the site, or B, it was not in flood zone 1 and 2?
Okay, Justin, would you attempt to answer that again, please? Simon.
Yes, sorry, it's the other way around to what Gary said. It's because it is within flood zone 1 or 2 rather than not within. And the scale of the development means that they are not a statutory consultee for the application.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And come on to Angus Ross now. Good evening, Angus.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a query. Don't quite understand. Perhaps I've missed something. Informative number 10 on bottom of page 121 is about listed building consent. Is there therefore going to be a separate listing building consent application, or was it covered under some previous consent?
Good.
That's a standard informative. It's been included just to account for they have submitted a list of building consent, so that'll be submitted at the same time and determined at the same time. So it's a general informative to cover this.
I think Angus's point, Simon, is it's not being determined by the committee. It's just the full application that's in front of us, not the listed building application, which will be a separate application.
Correct. The scheme will
be determined under delegated powers, subject to this item being approved.
Yes, the scheme of delegations only brought forward this application because it was a council application. The listed building consent isn't necessarily a council application in that sense.
Thank you for the clarification.
Right, Chris Bowring.
Sure. I'd like to say I agree with Stephen about playing this straight up the line. So I'm not going to make any political comments, as we've heard a few tonight. Angus has really raised the point I was going to raise, which is about the listed building consent application. This application is before the committee because it's a council committee. There are in the officer's report points made that this is of some damage to the listed building status of the old building. And yet the scheme of delegation means it doesn't come to the planning application, and that seems to be wrong. So my view is that the listed building application should come to the committee. I'm not saying anything has been done incorrectly; it's according to the constitution. But I would just flag that up as a suggestion that maybe we need to change the rules. Thank you.
Okay, but thank you for that, Chris. But obviously, you'll understand that if there is a requirement to make the rule change, we will make an appropriate change to the rules, not try and do it on the hoof tonight. Okay. Yep. Okay. Are there any other members wishing to speak? Because I still see a few hands up. People take their hands down if they've no longer wish to speak, please.
I can see Carl Dorrans.
Carl, sorry, I couldn't see you. Carl, good evening.
Good evening, Simon. Thank you for that, Malcolm. Oh, can you see me? You can't see me. Just checking. Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that thank you for Chris for making the point about political comments, so I won't make it again. Just wanted to say that there are downsides to this application. There's a loss of trees, loss of bat roosts, some harm to what is a Grade 2 building. But I want to echo your comment, Simon, about the. We might be looking differently at this if it was a residential or commercial space, and this is clearly going to bring a huge community benefit. There's just one quibble I've got, and that's on page 124. That's a response to the parish council's. Not they didn't object, obviously, but they said made a point about effectively parking for pushchairs and mobility scooters. And that it will be best accommodated within the internal layout of the library building. That's the officer's comment. And I just wanted to say, we're not going to attempt to redesign this application, but it's something that applicants should take on board, I think, especially WBC. I've just ended an aggregate of 7 years of pushing my kids around, and I'm sure many of you have done the same thing in the past. And we really need these things, especially in community kind of buildings. So it would have been nice to have something out there, but something for the future, really. But I'm very happy to support this application.
Okay. Right. Chris, you've got your hand up again. Hello, Chris. No, we appear to have, hopefully we haven't lost Chris, but Callum, can you confirm whether there's anybody else wishing to, indicating they wish to speak on this item, or can we now move on to the recommendation?
No, Chairman, I only see Chris Bowring's hand up.
Right. Chris, can you hear us? And if so, could you take your hand down? Thank you.
Sorry,
right.
comfort coming.
Okay. Right. Thank you, members. I think all told, we understand there are some constraints on the redevelopment of this building, but I think because of the significant and very long-awaited community benefit that will come from this, I think the council's taken a pragmatic view on this. And from what I've heard from all the speakers today, I think you all broadly support that. So could I please ask whether you're prepared to support the application as laid out in terms of the recommendation on pages 108 onwards in your agenda? Could you please raise your hand if you're willing to support? Right, that is 11. So that item I can confirm is carried unanimously. Could people please lower their hand? Thank you. Right, thank you very much, members, for your perseverance on that one. We now move on to another WBC application, and this is an application at Grovelands Park in Winnersh, and we have speakers on this one as well. And this application is being presented this evening by Senjuti Manna. Senjuti, will go straight across to you. Good evening.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks. Please bear with me as I share my screen with you. Would you please let me know if you can see my screen?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. The application number is 203439. This application is for the proposed removal of 12 existing mobile homes and erection of 11 two-story prefabricated temporary accommodation units consisting of one self-contained two-bedroom housing unit per floor and one single-story accessible mobile home. The application is presented to the committee because it is a Wokingham Borough Council application. So this is the site location plan. The site is located on the eastern edge of Winnersh, with open countryside on east and south, and M4 Junction 10 is located further southeast of the site. This is the aerial photograph of the site and its surroundings. The access is from Grovelands Avenue, and as can be seen, the site forms part of an existing residential caravan park. Caravan units, subject to the current application, are located near the southeastern corner of the wider caravan park. These are the site layout plans, the existing layout to the left and the proposed layout to the right. As can be seen, the proposed units would have slightly larger footprint compared to the existing units, but will be located approximately on the same area as the existing units. These are photographs of the existing units within the site. This photo shows the existing spacing between the units, which should more or less be retained. This is the existing street scene looking towards the open countryside on the south. And this is the street scene looking towards the north and other units. And these are typical plans and elevations of the proposed buildings. So the proposal would provide much needed emergency temporary accommodation to families, often including children and vulnerable people, while the household awaits permanent accommodation. The proposal would make a positive contribution to providing an essential community facility to address homelessness. The proposal would result in 11 additional units, whilst these two-story blocks would be permanent construction. The occupancy would be temporary in nature, and this would be controlled by a planning condition. The proposal has been assessed by Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Services, who have not raised any objections. The applicant has provided additional details regarding the upgrading of the sewage pumping station, and Buckingham Council's drainage officer has reviewed these details and hasn't raised any objections, subject to a condition securing additional details. That's the location of the pumping station that we are talking about. So for members' update, consultation responses has been now received from Fire and Rescue Services, who haven't raised any objection. Condition 13 has been amended to secure appropriate parking and turning as a pre-occupancy condition, and an additional condition, which is condition number 18, is included to secure electric vehicle charging point. So the recommendation is that, subject to the conditions set out in the officer report and members' updates, this application is approved. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We now come on to the first of the registered speakers, and the first speaker is Clinton Taylor, who's speaking on behalf of Greenwich Parish Council. Callum, is Clinton with us?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of Greenwich Parish Council, I'd just like to object to this application. Grovelands Park is a mobile home site, and as such consists of single-storey homes. Replacing these single-storey homes with two-storey homes would be out of character and overbearing on the neighbouring properties. Also, the current sewage system and pumping station is badly maintained and does not cope with the current number of homes. This needs to be addressed as part of any application. We would, however, support the replacement of homes with single-storey homes. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you very much for your succinct presentation, which gets to the key matters of concern to your parish council. Thank you for that. We now come on to Simon Price from WBC, who is, of course, the applicant. Simon, are you with us? We can see the top of your head, Simon. That's better.
Okay.
Good evening,
and thank you for the opportunity to speak, Chair. I'd like to address some points raised by our planning colleagues. So the proposed application will provide an improvement on the existing accommodation at Grovelands and will be part of our homelessness response as we hopefully come out of the pandemic. The company who are carrying out the works have a history of working in Wokingham, have worked on several school projects. I can confirm that the construction time will be much reduced due to the modular construction. The drainage system will be updated and additional capacity added for the new homes. This will meet the WBC guidelines in relation to sustainable drainage systems. I believe we have addressed the overlooking of homes with the layout, and obviously the double stacking is a major point of contention, and I acknowledge this. As mentioned at the start, Wokingham, along with other local authorities, must prepare for the exit of COVID, and we must manage a surge in homelessness applications and an increase in the homeless population in Wokingham as we come through this. This additional improved accommodation will have a direct impact of the quality of life of those who will be accommodated in them, and it means we're able to reduce the use of B&B out of borough, which means keeping our own children and families in borough. The local authority will be in control of cost and quality for this accommodation as well. The accommodation will be managed by Wokingham Borough Council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. And now we come on to ward members. And firstly, I have Prue Bray, who's speaking in support of the application. Good evening, Prue.
Oops. Having trouble here. Sorry.
We can hear you.
Can you see me now? Right, that's better. Yep. So Paul and I are sharing the 3 minutes, so I'll be speedy. I'm supporting the application because there's a pressing need for additional temporary accommodation, and because the proposals are for much better quality units than are currently there, which are not in good condition and have poor thermal insulation. I know people have concerns about the application, particularly about the 2 stories, but my view is those concerns have been sufficiently addressed for the application to be approved. Most of the windows face away from the rest of the site. Those that don't will be obscure glazed, and there will be screens for the staircases to prevent overlooking. Also, the units will have automatic fire suppressant systems, which makes them safe. There are enough parking spaces, and the issues with the sewerage, which were a concern, have been taken into account. I know there have been concerns about antisocial behaviour. This has been a problem in the past. We have to deal with it better, but those problems already exist and won't be created by this scheme. So as I say, I support this scheme because the council needs temporary accommodation for people, especially families with young children who would otherwise have to go into B&Bs out of the borough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Prue. And good evening, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I can confirm I do not object to the replacement of the existing single-storey units with single-storey homes. However, I wish to strongly object to this application on the following grounds. Grovelands Park is designated a mobile home park, and as such, all buildings should be single-storey. The application is for the removal of 12 single-storey units being replaced with 11 two-storey units. There is inadequate screening provided or proposed to prevent these unsightly units being seen, and they are out of character for residents who live on the mobile home park. This huge, ugly wall will cause overshadowing and restrict sunlight as they are to the south of the nearby homes. The existing sewage system and pumping station in the ownership of the council has been a constant failure for residents who live on the park for many years. The existing system is not fit for purpose for the existing residents, and adding more homes to this failing system will create further issues for its residents. The council therefore must fix this system before any new homes are established. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. So that concludes the registered speakers. So we now come on to the main body of the discussion. And again, as is customary, I will come to the ward member if there is one on the committee, and that, of course, is Rochelle. Good evening, Rochelle.
Hi, yes. Well, I have absolutely no problem with putting on some new single-story dwellings on a mobile home park. I have been in the mobile home parks more than several times over the last 9 years, and the biggest problem they have there is the sewage plant. I do not believe that double-stacked homes is the right idea for this. They have massing. There is problems with overlooking. There is several problems. It is out of keeping with the area. Now, I had a large argument with people about conservation zones and things like that, if you remember. And I was told that we should keep with the area as it is. There are single-story buildings only in this area. It should remain single-story. I know we need more accommodation, but we can make single-story accommodation to make it better for the local residents. So I believe that this application should be refused.
Thank you, Rochelle. We will hear from others before we come back to your suggestion. Now I come to Andrew Mickleborough.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The proposals are intended to help address real and significant issues, primarily to help provide more much-needed emergency accommodation and to replace existing accommodation that is in poor state of repair. The position of the site within with a sustainable major development location is also a significant planning consideration. However, I do have 5 questions which I'd like to ask in 2 batches, if I may. Firstly, parking. Am I correct in assuming from the drawings that the total number of parking spaces, 23, is greater than that currently existing? However, even if it is, this still works out at 1 space per home for the homes under consideration. Could officers please explain, using the drawings on page 189, where the occupants of numbers 39 to 43 currently park, and if they would also be sharing the total 23 spaces? The second question has already been alluded to, or relates to something already alluded to tonight. There are numerous references to problems with the existing sewage system. Could officers just explain again briefly how those problems will be addressed? And the third question in this first batch, I'm afraid, is that the inadequate outdoor amenity space would probably require refusal if the application related to permanent accommodation. I note it's stated that the emergency accommodation is typically for 9 to 12 months and that 12-month maximum stays would be conditioned. Is there any legislation that specifically exempts the kind of accommodation proposed from the rules regarding amenity space?
Okay, all right. Thank you, Andrew. They're good questions. So, Sanjuti, firstly, could you confirm the position on parking spaces? And presumably this will reflect the fact that people who are homeless may also perhaps not always have cars?
Yes, and actually, interestingly, whilst the applicant has proposed 23 spaces, the highway suggests we actually require only 16 for this kind of development. So for Buckingham Borough Council's parking standards, the requirement is 16 spaces and not 23. So currently the highways officers are negotiating with the applicant to revise the parking layout, because the one you are looking at this moment in the agenda, it's quite tight in terms of having maneuverability and spaces behind the parking. So highways officers consider that if the number of spaces are reduced to 16, we can have better layout. That's the reason why condition 13 has been reworded to say that we require a parking and turning plan to be approved pre-occupancy. So that's the highway's position. So the number of parking spaces will be reduced actually from 23 to 16. And
just to be clear, notwithstanding the fact that the number of new units, that you are saying that to be compliant with our parking policy for this type of accommodation, that 16 parking spaces would be fully policy compliant.
Yes, that's true, Chair. 16 parking spaces with 2 disabled parking and electric vehicle charging points. That's what we require in terms of borough parking standards.
So just while we're
go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, just while we're on that point, does that include the homes numbered 39 to 43? And where do they currently park? And are they included?
No, they're not, Andrew. No,
they're not included. Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Could we now come on to the item of sewage? And before we start, could we get absolute clarification? Starting to talk about utilities, is this actually a bit like discussing building control as well? Is it taking us beyond the remit of planning? Because it's a broad assumption that when we approve houses, we don't generally say, well, will there be adequate electricity supply? Will there be adequate gas supply? Will there be adequate water supply? That is a separate matter. Justin, could you possibly provide some clarification on that?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, to an extent, it does go slightly beyond the remit of what you are considering. Having said that, there is an identified problem on the site, and you've heard from the applicant that they are planning to take measures to improve the situation. So, whilst I can't tell you to give it a lot of weight, you can have some comfort that actually there will be benefits as a result of this proposal.
Okay, thank you. And Sanjuti, could you discuss the issue about the requirements for amenity space? I think Andrew's question related to the fact that the amenities space is limited and inadequate, but those standards only apply to permanent accommodation. Is that right?
Yes, that's true. So whilst these buildings are permanent in construction, that is, they are C3. However, because of both internal amenity as well as external amenity fall short of our standards, that's why the occupancy would be strictly controlled to 12 months, because beyond that, it becomes permanent, and we wouldn't really like to see people using these for a long time.
Thank you. I guess I would add to that, as I think been hinted at by previous speakers, that whilst that is not desirable, these would be significantly more spacious in terms of living standards compared with a family with children living in bed and breakfast accommodation outside of the borough, which might be an alternative, which is probably less acceptable. Right, thank you. I believe you had a couple more questions, Andrew.
Yes, I did. And the next question actually follows on from the comment that the comments have just been made about internal space. And I do accept, what you have just said, Simon, about the need to look at likely alternatives, for those people who would not be accommodated, might not be accommodated should these new units come on stream. But the fact that the units do fail to meet internal space standards does still concern me, especially when some are likely to include children. And then you couple this with the lack of external amenity space as well. So I'm just wondering, if anyone, if officers confirm if anybody's been consulted on whether what's proposed might lead to or exacerbate any emotional health problems, amongst occupants, because we want to provide a standard of accommodation, that is going to be healthy, physically, emotionally, and so on. And then the final question. I note that there are a lot of references to fire safety measures, but what I didn't see was any reference to a suitable fire assembly point nearby, and one which would be able to accommodate the likely number of occupants. I did, however, see in one of the aerial photographs a fairly large green space, open green space, relatively nearby. Given the proposed density of the development and the existing layout, can you explain where that fire assembly point would be and give assurances that it would be compliant?
Okay, well, on fire assembly, again, I'd look for some guidance from the officers, but I've never come across a situation before where this is a planning matter. Could you clarify, please, Justin?
Yeah, thank you. So that, Andrew, that's not for consideration under the application, although I would assume that the park itself has a plan, and so the units here would follow the existing plan for the park.
Okay, and then Andrew's other point related to the pressure and psychological issues that residents might suffer if they are living here in undersized units with a lack of amenity space. And I think I would refer Andrew to the fact that, as we previously discussed, yes, it may be undersized, but people here are in transit to better accommodation. So they've no doubt come from inadequate accommodation to this, which acts almost as an intermediate point before we're able to house them in our own council houses or the very many affordable houses that are being added to our housing stock because of the level of large-scale development in the borough. But I don't think we can really delve into that level of detail on a planning matter. I hear your concerns, but I hope I've perhaps pointed you to the taking a balanced view on this when looking at the alternatives and the fact that this isn't a permanent arrangement.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. Who else do we have to speak, Callum?
Let me check the order quickly, Chairman.
Yep.
So it might be slightly off only because when people join from a different account, not WBC, it's not always in order. But the order I have it is Carl Duran, then Abdul Loys, then Pauline Jorgensen, then Malcolm Richards, then Gary Cowan, then Stephen Conway, and there was another one, but they've just Chris Bowring as well. We've got.
Oh, it has been up for ages. I might be having a Conway problem with it before here.
Okay. We'll get to you all in the end anyway. So, Carl Duran next. Carl.
Thanks, Chair. I totally understand the pressing need for this emergency accommodation, and I realise this doesn't fit our usual amenity standards. And since I've become a councillor a couple of times, I've seen some of the B&B accommodation that people are living in, and this is meant to replace. So totally understand we if it's not up to those standards, it's still better. But like Andrew, I kind of worry about the outdoor amenity space, considering this would mostly be families with children, and they could be there for up to 12 months. It's a long time. They need space to move about. On that point, on the diagram, which shows the proposed layout, the previous layout and the proposed layout, in the proposed layout on the eastern side behind that whole row, there's a large area of shaded in a darker green, which doesn't appear to be part of the amenity space. And I'm just wondering whether that's accessible. I'm sure if it is, kids will find it and it'll get used, even though it's not designated as such. But I'd be interested to know what that is. I couldn't tell from the photographs. And I've got a couple of other questions as well.
Can we have
mainly on? Yeah. Basically, yes. On page 171, applicant's points, it talks about the modular design adopts a passive fire protection approach. Genuine question. I don't really know what that means. So I'd be interested if you could explain what that means. And also, an automatic fire suppression system will be fitted, which is on page 180. And it'd be just nice to be told, is that sprinklers? If you could let us know one way or the other. Okay. So just those three. Okay.
Thank you. Perhaps we'll take them in reverse order, because I happen to know that one of the members of the committee is also a member of the Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service as well. So
two are.
Oh, so my apologies. Yes, there are two. In fact, there's Angus and Rochelle. Could Sanjuti, would you attempt to answer the issue about fire safety and fire suppressant?
Yes, Chair. So what I understand is that these systems are slightly more advanced compared to sprinklers. So these are more like misters, if you like. I mean, I don't even know if that's the correct word, but basically when there is a fire, it just starts to give out mists, so which apparently works better than sprinklers. And so that's the automated, there's the passive fire suppression or automated, I don't know, either of the two. And the second aspect is that we have all the internal walls and finishes would be fire resistant. So it's going to give 60 minutes of fire resistance, basically. So when you put both of these together, then you don't need the traditional 6 meter separation, which you would normally need between standard caravans. So because we have these two systems in place, that's why Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Services, they're happy with the layout. Even when we don't have really 6 meters between few of the units, it's about 5 and 3/4 meters, kind of like that. But they're happy with this because of these systems.
Okay, thank you, Sanjuti. And Carl also had a question about the dark green space shown on the layout plan. I assume that, I'm guessing that might be woodland, but are you able to clarify it? And also whether that is in the council's ownership or not?
That's outside of the council's ownership, but it's in countryside, open countryside next to Embrook. So obviously you can't stop children from going there. You also have, I think it's called Maiden's Field, the open countryside to the south. So yes, I mean, I understand and I agree there is a problem in terms of external amenity, but yes, for a temporary accommodation, I think in this case we can probably take a balanced approach.
So sorry, Carl, can I just add a point that there is actually a grassed area within the park. I don't know whether or not it functions as amenity space for the occupants, but there is a space. It's about 80 meters by 25 meters wide. So if it was available, it does afford some good level of play.
All right. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, it isn't a kind of point where I would say that we need to stop this, but I'm much more reassured to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Abdul Lois.
Thank you, Chair. As Simon Price has alluded, that this borough urgently need emergency accommodation for our homeless people. This will save us a lot of thousands of pounds for this borough, and therefore I'll be supporting this application. And I'm aware of the area because I used to rent a few units from that Groveland, and they have mitigate the problem of flooding issues. So therefore, I am quite happy there won't be any problem on that. Thank you, and I'll support this application.
Thank you very much. Pauline Jorgensen.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to go back to, it seems a long time ago now, the points made by the local members and the parish council. I'd just like to clarify something. Maybe the officers can explain to me. I thought I heard a comment that they were worried about overlooking in terms of the double height units, and I can't see it from the plan myself because the double height units are backing onto Countryside. I just wondered if somebody could explain that, please.
Sanjuti?
Yes. So these double height units, they have their windows all facing towards south, which is looking towards the open countryside, and each unit would look into the other unit's external staircase. Now, one potential area of overlooking could be the landing of the staircase from where you access these first floor units. To prevent that from happening, a condition has been included to secure privacy screening for these landings so that nobody can use it as an external balcony and overlook into the neighbors' plots. Does it answer your question, Pauline?
Yes, it does. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay, thank you, Pauline. Malcolm Richards.
Thank you, Chairman. 2 or 3 quick questions. The first one, I was going to mention the frosted windows as well, but that's Pauline just mentioned that. It is a 2-level accommodation, and some of the objections quoted earlier were because they're 2-level. However, they're flat roof, aren't they? So there's no sort of big angled roof that makes it high. So the overall height is not going to be like a traditional 2-story house, I don't think, unless I'm misunderstanding. The diagrams definitely show a flat roof, I think, if you can confirm that. The second thing is a question. Is this area going to be lit at night, or is it going to be like a dark car park? I don't know. I'm not too familiar with the area at night. I've been around there in the day, and I didn't notice if there are any lights. So are there any lights that will illuminate that area in the evening, especially if there are children out there playing or coming home from school? And the third question is, it mentions, I think there's N spaces, 23 spaces, I think, and then it says 2 disabled. Are those 2 disabled spaces part of the 23, or are they in addition? Those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think we can see from the diagrams that, as you correctly point out, these are flat roof buildings. They're not pitch roofs. So I think that dispatches the first one. I'll leave Sanjuti.
So they aren't going to be much lower than a real 2-story. Yeah.
Yeah, so the overall height would be 6 meters, 3 meters for each unit. So, and because we have 6 meters more or less gap between each unit, we don't think overbearing or overshadowing is any problem here because of the limited heights of these units. As for the street lights, there are existing street lamps on the road. So those will be retained. Also, each unit is going to have one small external lighting, which are low powered and I think motion sensitive, so that when somebody is coming in, the light is going to just automatically get turned on.
By movement.
Yes. Yeah. And sorry, your third question.
Are the 2 disabled spaces counted as part of the existing 23, or are they in addition?
So there are existing 14 spaces at this moment, and the proposal was to increase it to 23, including these 2 disabled spaces. However, the council's parking standards wouldn't require that many. We require only 16 spaces with 2 disabled parking. So currently the parking plan is going to be changed, and we have secured it using a condition so that the parking and turning is approved before the occupancy of these units.
Thank you. And then there is a last bit. I just forgot to read my own notes. It's on the, I might have read it and not seen. It's on the waste, on the bins and things. Will each of these places have they don't have gardens as such, but what do they do with their waste? Do they have bins outside, or is it a big communal bin?
No, each unit has got its own bin and drying yard at the back. So if you look at the site plan, it's not that these units occupy the entire plot. There's still some spaces which is not really adequate as an external amenity. However, we still have spaces for a bin store, cycle store, as well as for drying yards. So each plot has got its own service area for them.
Thank you. Thank you.
So this is a very good scheme. I think we need it, and I will be approving it.
Okay, thank you. Just before we come on to the next speaker, Gary Cowan, Chris Bowring, are you there? Yeah, Chris,
yes, I am here.
I'm not inviting you to speak. I'm just going to say, as I think I discussed earlier, Finchamstead had 1,000 houses without power this afternoon. I'm just flagging up to you that my lights have been flickering for the last 5 minutes.
Nothing worse
So
than lights.
if I suddenly disappear, you will know why, and you will need to pick up the reins. So hopefully, the electricity board will be able to keep us going.
I'm ready and willing, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, right. Gary Cowan.
Thank you, Simon. Well, the usual question, the planning status is flood zones 1 and 2, and it refers to CC09. And my question to start off with is, should the Environment Agency not have been consulted on this PA, and if not, why not? So that's the main question, but I'll leave that while I get on with other things. Listening to the debate so far, there's references to 16, I may have got this wrong, 16 car parking spaces for 23 units, and there was a reference to motion sensing lights. Now, on motion sensing lights, I would suggest that they would be a complete nuisance in an environment like that area, which I actually know quite well, as I had a very good friend of mine on hard times who lived in one of the specific caravans or mobile homes we're talking about, which wasn't a very pleasant experience. I would add that they won't win a Royal Institute Society award for their architecture. That's very clear. I think they're pretty awful. It's better than no home. If you didn't have a home, I would rather have that than nothing. But the big thing about it is, without vertical pictures, and again, there's no pictures in our documents showing what the overall area looks like. They'll stand out like a sore thumb. The whole area is pretty much all caravans in every direction you look, or mobile homes, and suddenly in one corner there'll be the double-story units. On Ardfield Garrison, they're building prefab units, and they look more like houses than containers, if I could put it that way. I do think the accommodation is desperately needed in the council, but I think the council will be letting down the people who move into them because of the dreadful appearance and look of them, and how they fit into that whole environment. I'm open-minded as to whether I will support or not support this, because I think what will happen is they will create more problems in the future than there is now. But I'm listening to the further debate, and I'll make my own mind up later. But I would like an answer on the flood zone 1 and 2 question, please.
Right. Yes. So could we have an answer relating to Gary's initial point, relating to consultation with the Environment Agency, please?
Yes. So the site is primarily within flood zone 1, and the Schedule 4 of Development Management Practice doesn't require us to consult Environment Agency if it is within flood zone 1, unless it has a critical drainage problems, and that had to be notified to us for the purpose of this application, which hasn't happened in this case. So that's the reason why we didn't consult Environment Agency. However, the applicant has submitted a flood risk assessment with the application, and this has been assessed by the council's drainage officer.
Okay. Thank you very much. Could I now come on to Stephen Conway?
Thank you very much, Chair. I hate to say this. Has Chris had the chance to speak?
Not yet, no.
I think he might have been ahead of me in the queue.
I'm very patient, Stephen. You go ahead.
Well, that's kind of you, Chris. Thank you very much. My comment at this stage, Simon, is that this is actually a very difficult application for the planning committee to determine. It really, there are competing, if not conflicting, considerations that we have to take on board. And I would summarize these as, first of all, is clearly a very, very great need. for the borough to provide more housing for homeless people, to avoid people having to be put into bed and breakfast accommodation, which is totally unsuitable for families, especially if it were out of the borough. So there's clearly a need for accommodation to help people in this really dreadful situation. And in that sense, this application is surely something we should be, in principle, supporting. But there is, of course, also another important consideration that we have to take into account, and that's the impact on the existing residents in Groveland Park. We have to be concerned about their amenity, as well as providing a much needed service for people who are homeless. So we really have got to try and strike the best possible balance between these two competing demands on our attention. And I think what we have to do, if we're going to approve this application on the basis that we need this kind of provision badly, we have to try and do everything we can to minimise the detrimental impact on the people who live in Groveland's Park. What we've heard so far is in some senses encouraging. The overlooking problem doesn't seem to be a problem that would directly affect the existing residents in Groveland's Park. The overlooking would actually be of new residents by new residents in the new blocks. That to me is somewhat less of a problem than overlooking of existing residents by the new buildings. But I do think one of the things that we might want to do is try to make sure that we can maximise the screening of these new blocks to minimise the visual impact on the existing residents. I mean, what we have here is something that I'm afraid by any standards is out of keeping with the surrounding area. I think it may be that the need outweighs that consideration, but we have a duty, I think, to maximise the protections for the existing residents so that this minimises the harm to their amenity. And one of the things I would like to see is a really robust screening to help protect their visual amenity.
Thank you, Stephen. Could I suggest members just have a look at the third of the paper plans in your agenda, which is the site layout. It's labelled 5651-1101C. Just think if people could have a look at that. We've heard already this evening that firstly these are located in the southeast corner, so they are more discreetly away from, they're not sort of as though they're right in the centre of Groveland's Park. Secondly, we've heard that there'll be use of obscured glass, and thirdly, we've heard that the vast majority of windows, if not all, are on the southern face of these buildings, so looking to the south or slightly southeast. And clearly, we're in no doubt that they are physically more dominant than what is already there, but some might argue that a timber type finish to these prefabricated units is perhaps a little easier on the eye than the photographs we saw earlier of fairly ugly, unattractive, cream-coloured mobile homes. So clearly, we're going to have a balanced decision when we come onto this, and I thank Stephen for his well thought through comments on this. Could we now hear from Chris Baring?
Yep, thank you. Pauline mentioned, she referred to earlier comments which were a long time ago. They're probably twice as long a time ago now. But Councillor Fishwick did mention that as this was a designated mobile home, first of all, is there such a thing as a designated mobile home? But he said as it was, then only single-storey dwellings were permissible. That's my first question. Could I have an answer to that, please?
I think that might actually, Chris, relate to the definition of a caravan or mobile home, which is always defined in law. I think it's 60 or 62 feet long. I can't remember the width, but it is a single story always. So by the very nature of what they're putting here, there is no way that what is proposed here can be called caravans or mobile homes. They are prefabricated two-storey permanent dwellings that are allowing for the fact they're modular and they can be delivered on a lorry. Unlike a mobile home, they can't literally be, in theory, wheeled away. So my understanding is that that these are classified as dwellings, mobile homes, but perhaps Sanjuti, you could elaborate.
Yes, Chair, you are correct here. These are two-storey permanent units, like C3 flats. So as a result of this development, this particular section of the site, there'll be a change of use from mobile home park to residential. So, however, the officers think that because the mobile home park itself is a residential use and the change of use is going to be residential again, this change of use is not going to harm the general character of the park.
I don't see the words change of use in the proposal. Is that do you mean change of use in the technical planning sense?
Yes, as in, if you look at the planning application form, the applicant has requested for change of use in the application form, but that's not included in the description because the operational development itself will result in a change of use. It's kind of, we don't have to specifically mention it.
Okay, thank you. The business about the sewage, there's a phrase that a planning application should consume its own smoke. And while recognising that there are problems with sewage, is it not correct that if this application were to be approved, did not make the situation worse, that is okay? It's not up to this application to solve the problem of sewage.
The sewage is a problem. Sorry, Chair, do you want to
Yes,
say
please
anything?
go. No, you go ahead.
The sewage is a problem. We have recognized that, but as Justin had previously clarified, it's not. It goes beyond the remit of this particular planning application. However, the applicant has also given us more information on how they are planning to upgrade the existing sewage system. So we don't think there is any objection in terms of the planning application on sewage grounds. And also there is a flood risk assessment submitted with the planning application, which gives more technical details in terms of foul water and things like that.
So it's good that it may actually make the present situation better, but it's not incumbent on the application to do so. So that's a bonus, if you like.
Yeah.
Yeah. I support what Stephen said. I mean, when we determine planning applications, we have to look at both sides of the argument, and it seems to me that the homes are not in keeping with the rest of the site, with the single-storey sites, but we have to balance that with the fact that there is a degree of screening which helps. All these two-storey dwellings are set aside from the rest of the site, and of course that there is a social benefit that it helps people who are temporarily unemployed, and we have to make that balance. But I can see that the members, some members are concerned and might perhaps be inclined to refuse this application. It's a bit unusual, but could I ask, is it technically possible to give a temporary planning consent to see, as it were, how things go?
I think, Chris, the problem with that is obviously these new units will be a not insignificant investment for the council, and like anybody, they have to look at the financial implications of something that was perhaps just a short-term investment, in which case it may not be considered viable. I don't know whether Simon Price, are you still on the call, Simon?
I am, Simon.
Yeah. Would you be able to comment on what impact Chris's suggestion of having a permission for a temporary period, what implication that would have in terms of the viability of what your application seeks to achieve?
You're absolutely correct about the investment required in this accommodation, Simon. The whole scheme is predicated initially on the double stacking, so we get economies of scale, we get better value for money. So I would suggest that for a temp, you've actually already said that they are in effect permanent structures as part of this application. So giving a temporary permission, I don't think would be, I don't think it would work in these circumstances, but I would defer to my planning colleagues.
Okay, all right, okay. So I think Chris, you're getting a fairly strong pushback on there that the costs involved it just wouldn't work for what in essence will be half the number of units that's being proposed.
Okay, just to establish that it's legally possible in planning law to do that.
We could put any planning condition on you want, but whilst I accept these are prefabricated, but I would imagine, for example, if we had uncertainty about somebody building some new houses, conventional built houses, if we tried to put a condition on saying that these houses, well, we'll see how they go and whether the neighbours like them, but if so, we might want to knock them down after 5 years. I would imagine that the applicant would gratefully accept that permission, but would immediately go to appeal on that particular condition. And I think any planning inspector would be highly likely to overturn that.
I fully accept that. Obviously, that's true. This is nevertheless a smaller investment. So anyway, it's a possibility. But my own view on the balance is that I think, due to the screening, that we should approve the application because of the benefit to those who find themselves homeless, particularly with the 12-month limit on the occupancy. Deals with many of the points I think Carl raised about amenity. So my conclusion at the moment is that we should approve this application. Thank you.
Right.
May I make some comments, Simon, also at the end here.
I'll come back to you in a minute, Rochelle, because I believe you may wish to, having heard the discussions, you still may wish to make a proposal. I had a question that I would like to get clarified first. We have residential standards relating to space between dwellings and the level of overlooking, and we have specified distances from front to rear, front to side type relationships between dwellings. And obviously we have heard that these are going to be regarded as conventional residential dwellings in that sense. How do we stand in the application of those distance guidelines that we have when the properties which they relate to are not permanent dwellings, i.e. what is the position with the relationship between these dwellings and some of the existing mobile home units on the site?
Since the existing units are caravans, the separation distances normally follow the site license requirements, that is 6 meters.
6 meters, yeah, okay.
Yes. Now this set of units would be C3 now. There'll be a change of use. So obviously there is a consideration for that. Now, typically we would like to see front to side. That's the relationship we would have from the unit number 47 with the nearest neighbors. So we would like to see 12 meters separation. This doesn't really follow 12 meters. It falls slightly short of that. But in this case, probably would say again, it's acceptable because the occupancy would be temporary. So, and the landscape scheme also includes quite a lot of screening along the boundary or in form of high hedging. So I think in this instance, it is acceptable.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Chris, did you want to come back on your point? Because your hand is still up. Otherwise, I was going to go to Rochelle now.
I apologise. I always forget to lower it. I'm lowering it now. Thank you.
Simon, before you go to Rochelle, may I just seek clarification on one final point?
Okay.
This is Stephen Conway. I just wanted to come back on the point about screening. We've just heard about the high hedging that's planned on some of the boundaries. Would it be possible for Sanjuti to indicate where the hedging is planned to be introduced so we can get a sense of what kind of security and screening we're going to be providing to help the existing residents with the new dwellings?
So if you look at the proposed site plan, Yeah. The drawing number 1103H.
Yep.
That
H.
gives an
H.
Yes.
Right. Which one's that?
That's the second site plan.
Okay, hold it. Oh, right, found it. Yep.
Yeah, so that shows it's
which page?
Well, unfortunately, the plans aren't page numbered, but it's two plans back from page 193. I think you'll find.
So there is a color key on the plan, which shows you the existing hedging, which would be retained, and then the proposed hedging as well. And as you can see, all along the boundary between the units, as well as between the existing and the proposed units, there will be hedging. So our trees and landscape officers have gone through this plan. They have reviewed the plan and they're happy with the proposal. And we consider the officers think it is sufficient to provide adequate screening in this case.
So these are shrubs effectively that are going to provide height as well as width.
Yes, it's a hedge, typical boundary hedging.
Right. Okay. Well, I think the height is the fairly critical thing here, that we can be confident this is going to grow tall enough to provide some screening, or at least break up the appearance of bulk and massing on the boundary of some of the existing caravan plots.
I'm not really a tree expert, but I can go back and check with the landscape officer. The landscape officers were quite happy with this proposed landscape plan. That's the reason why the condition, I just check the condition number for you. One of the conditions suggests that the landscape as approved should be implemented.
Is it possible, Chairman, to actually add an informative that might help the applicant, Simon, to actually press for the kind of screening and hedging that we're looking for, which is designed to maximise the screening, to minimise the impact of these new dwellings on the existing plot holders?
Yeah, I'm sure, well, I'm guessing that most members would be happy to support such an informative, but I think in the first instance we need to come back to Rochelle. So if you'd allow me to do that.
Of course,
So Rochelle, you made it very clear as ward member, you don't, not inclined to
I would have no problem with a single stories replacement with single stories. However, since I've been on the planning committee for 9 years, I can think of hundreds of applications where we've reduced 4 stories to 3 stories, 3 stories to 2 stories, out of keeping with the area. I also have questions about what's going to stop the existing residents from building 2-story places, removing their mobile homes and putting 2-story places in, or 3-story places or something like this. I don't think that, you're setting a precedent, but you're removing mobile home park things. Also, mobile home park regulations are very specific about what they can and can't do. So you want to change this to residential. You're going to completely change the area for a number of there's an awful lot of elderly retired people in this area, and you're going to do this. You wouldn't do this in your own neighborhood, as far as that goes, to put a much larger story building. You have a 2-story building, would you like a 3-story building right next to you? Or a number of them right in a row. I just think this is out of keeping with the area. And I believe we've refused a number of applications in that area when people wanted to put in 2-story to replace a mobile home, and because there was a mobile home park, but we're doing it. I believe we need the accommodation. Yes.
Yeah, Rochelle, I must ask you, I understand where you're coming from. Do you wish to
support this? I cannot support this application as it is right now. I cannot support it. I don't believe that there's enough people to refuse it, but I cannot support it and I cannot vote for it because I believe it's out of keeping, and I believe it defeats most of the purpose of what this mobile home park was designed for.
Okay, we hear your comments, Rochelle, but I would invite you in the interest of your residents, if you wish to put an alternative proposal to the one in front of us. So, but that's entirely up to you if you don't wish to do so.
I will do so. I wish to refuse this application based on the fact that it is out of keeping with the local area. I would be happy to have 1 story. I would have absolutely no reservations whatsoever.
Rochelle, a refusal reason has to relate to what you don't want, not what you do want. So you're saying it will be out of keeping with the character of the area.
Yeah.
Okay.
And changing the amenity of the retired people in the area.
Loss of amenity. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So just to be clear, Rochelle's suggesting she will put forward a proposal relating to loss of amenity and negative impact on the character of the area. And I would like to see whether someone would like to second that with Rochelle. Does anyone like to second that? I can't.
Gary, I'll second it.
Sorry, Gary?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Gary. Okay, so we have a proposal that's put forward that has been proposed and seconded. So the first thing we have to do is we have to see whether there is support for this alternative proposal. So is the proposal adequately understood by members? That Rochelle is suggesting that there'll be a loss of amenity for obviously the existing residents, and that the proposal is out of keeping and out of character with the area. That is my understanding. Rochelle, would you confirm that?
Yes, I confirm.
You're seeking. Okay. Does anyone need any clarification before we put that to an initial vote? In that case, could members please indicate whether they support this proposal by raising their hand? Callum, I'm reliant on you, so I can only see 9.
Chairman, I have Rochelle's hand is raised, and I believe, Gary Cowan as well, so that's 2.
Okay. Anyone missing a vote? I don't think so. So unfortunately, Rochelle, that isn't supported by the committee. So we now go to the recommendation as laid out in your report, just to confirm where those recommendations are, and they should be read in conjunction.
Sorry, Simon, it is possible technically that the other members could have abstained on the proposal, in which case it carried.
You're technically correct. So, sorry, I would ask, is there a member who would wish to abstain? And I see no one indicating. Could members please indicate if they don't support Rochelle's proposal? Then we've got a full hearing from everybody. Callum?
Don't support, you say?
We had two members voted for Rochelle's proposal. We're now seeking votes for those that are against in the interest of absolute clarity.
Chairman, I have 9 hands up, so that's the remaining members.
That's the remaining members. Okay, so as I said, Rochelle, unfortunately that didn't gain majority support. So members, I'd now ask you whether you'd support this application as laid out in the report with a minor supplementary that's detailed in the Grovelands Park element of the members' update, and also, if we're doing this, to add an informative along the lines Stephen indicated, encouraging the applicant, namely the council, to consider additional landscaping to reinforce and help screen what in essence will be a mobile home park and some residential dwellings to provide a greater screening between each part. So members, could you please indicate whether you're prepared to support the proposal?
I have 9 members, Chairman.
Okay, so I can confirm that the WBC Housing Services proposal for the new units at Grovelands Park is approved. Thank you, members, for your forbearance on quite a challenging application.
We haven't voted. We haven't had a chance to vote against it. Also.
So, okay. Yes. Sorry. You're quite right, Rochelle. My apologies. So could we please have everybody take their hands down, and could we please have people indicate whether they wish to abstain firstly?
Simon, yeah, that's none,
Yeah,
Simon.
No one indicating. And in that case, could those members who are against please show now that they're against? And that will be Gary Cowan and Rochelle. Thank you very much, members. We now move on to agenda item 57, which is on page 93, I believe. 193. 193, yep. Which is a proposed scout hut, I think. Yes, it is. Sorry, a meeting hall, as they term it. Scout hut, as I term it. So, Sanjuti, I believe you're carrying us through this one as well. Just to confirm that we have no further speakers registered on either this item or the Highwood Bungalow item. So over to you, Sanjuti.
Thank you, Chair. Could you please confirm if you can see my screen and the presentation?
Yes, I can see it.
Thank you. So this is application number 202106. This application is for the proposed erection of a new Scouts meeting hall following demolition of existing meeting hall, relocation of 3 metal storage containers plus car park improvements with the installation of a cycle stand. This application is presented to the committee since the site area is more than 1 hectare. So this is the site location plan. The site is located to the eastern side of Wengels Road, opposite Wengels College at Woodley-Charville border. The site is located within an ancient woodland and forms part of a local wildlife site known as Norris's Copse Bird Sanctuary. And this is the aerial view of the site and its surroundings. As can be seen, Wengels College has a significant presence within this area, and that's the site. This is the proposed site layout plan. It is proposed to contain the spread of development within the area closer to the existing access to minimize disturbances to the ancient woodlands. These are the photos of the existing car parking area. The photos of the existing meeting hall and these storage containers. The view of the site from the entrance gate is the photo of that. And this is from the other side, so the view towards the gate and towards Wengels College from within the site. And that's the view of the site from the road in front of it. As you can see, the site is quite well screened by existing boundary vegetation. And that's the plan of the entire spread of development. These are plans and elevations for the proposed replacement hall. So replacing the existing meeting hall with a new one will not materially alter the use of the site, and as such, there is no objection to it in principle. The proposed development would be more compact in nature and would be located near the existing entrance that would reduce disturbances to the ancient woodland. The proposal includes removal of 17 trees, but replanting 57 large and small trees, and this is going to improve the landscape character of the site. The council's landscape and ecology officers have assessed the proposal and raised no objection to the scheme. There is no objection to the increased size of the replacement hall. The volume increase is primarily related to replacing the flat roof with a pitch roof. For members' update, this includes amendments to condition 6 to provide a 3 months overlap between the first occupancy of the new hall and demolition of the old hall to facilitate transition. Additionally, information is provided on existing and proposed footprint and volume of the meeting hall. So it is recommended that, subject to conditions set out in the officer report and the members' update, this application is approved. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sanjuti, for a very succinct presentation. And I think this is, I'm hoping members will find this to be a quite straightforward application of significant community benefit. And in many ways, it's an enhancement of something that already exists. And again, this would obviously help good for younger people at a time when we eventually emerge from current lockdown, when I'm sure they'll have lots of fun running about in the woods and having fires and building camps and doing all the other things that Scouts do. So we have nobody registered to speak on this item, and I will guess we don't actually have a ward member. So I will throw this open, and I put Gary Cowan first, please.
Thank you, Simon. It's the same with as per all the other planning applications. The first time I've seen a picture of the site is when it pops up here. I can't see why these pictures showing the trees and the vertical spaces involved could not have been part of the documentation we received. So at least we could judge this stuff more clearly at home and perhaps even decide to go and complete a site visit. There's a reference to the removal of woodland. They talk about TPO protected trees, but as I gather, it's 8 TPO protected trees, 3 groups of 2, which is 6, 2 groups of 5, which is 10, which is a total of 16. But they talk of removing 17 trees, so there's obviously one missing, or somebody's mathematics don't quite work out. The planting of 57 trees would be helpful, but if they're little whips and they're there to replace substantial trees, I don't think it's adequate. We do have a climate emergency programme within the council, and I would like to see, if trees are to be removed, then sufficient trees are planted to specifically deal with that application. What I would hate to see happen, and I think probably will happen, is that Gregor Murray's plan to plant loads of trees for climate emergency, a bit like Sang, we'll start pulling in on these and using them to offset trees we're cutting down for other forms of development. And so my issue is really around the trees, the presentation of the documentation and the drawings to us and the pictures as members of a committee inspected to make a decision. It's not against the principle of the development. I do support that. I think it is a community benefit, but there are the side issues that go along, and I'm just very disappointed by them. But I will support the application.
Okay, thank you, Gary. I think there was only one specific question in that, and that related to Gary's calculation that 17 trees would be lost when the report implies 16. Sanjuti, are you able to offer clarification on that?
Yes, probably it was my fault the way I have written up. So it's basically 8 individual trees, two groups of 2 trees, so that makes 12, and then 1 group of 5 trees, so totally 17.
So the number quoted is correct. Thank you.
Yes, the number is correct, and I can also tell you exactly the distribution of the 57 trees that have been now proposed as replacement. So we have 25 trees which will be planted on the footprint of the existing building when that's removed. Those 25 trees include 10 English oaks, 5 Scots pines, and 10 small leaf limes. And then we have 20 more trees, a mix native plants around the car park, and then 7 more hazels and 5 groups of hornbeams within any existing gaps in the existing woodlands. So here I'd just like to say our trees and landscape officer has actually worked for quite a couple of months with the applicants to arrive at an acceptable landscape scheme. And we are quite satisfied. I'd say the officers are quite happy with the proposal in terms of the impact of the scheme on landscape as well as on ecology.
Yep. Okay. And just to pick up on Gary's point about how many, what will be an appropriate number of trees to replace. I guess what we're hearing here is broad numbers that we're replant. I appreciate they will be very different in size and scale initially. But we're replanting, or the proposed is that the applicant will replant 3 trees for every single tree lost. I do accept that they will be clearly much smaller, but that's fairly normal. So now come on to Rochelle next, please.
Okay. I do commend this as a very great idea. It's a shame the same thing couldn't be done for the Winnish Scouts, the Embrough Scouts, or the poor Scouts down in California Country Park, where the council took over their Scout hut, which they paid for.
Rochelle, is there a planning question you'd like to make, please?
I'd like to see why we can't do the same thing for other scouts in other areas.
It's not a matter for the planning committee. We're determining an application that is in front of us tonight. We're not broadening this to talk about the benefits of scout huts across the borough, which I'm sure have merit, but this is not the right venue for that. Do you have a specific question?
No, I
No,
just wanted
thank you.
my comment.
Pauline Jorgensen.
Thank you, Simon. I'm very keen on this, as I think it's a good facility that's well used by scouts across the borough, actually, not just in this local vicinity. There was one question, actually, going back to Gary's point, though. I just wanted some reassurance that it's going to be landscaped against the road. I mean, the only advantage I can see with the current facility is that you can't see it. I just wanted to make sure along the front of the site that will retain trees and hedges, so that actually it's not an eyesore on the road. It's actually a bit sort of in the background. As I say, the only thing I can think that was good about the other one is that you can't see it at the moment.
Okay, all right. Sanjuti, perhaps you just refer to the areas where trees are to be lost and the areas where trees are to be increased and reinforced relative to its position between the proposed building and the highway.
So the landscape officer was quite keen to retain all the existing boundary planting. That's the reason why we had to do quite a lot of negotiation in terms of the planting, the plan. So if you look at the plan of, I hope I have included it. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to find it out for you. Yeah, so if you look at the plan, the fourth plan in the pack, it is numbered 2.06C.
Yep, got it.
Yeah, so all these trees near the car park, which are going to be impacted, we have ensured that those are retained.
Yep.
And then any additional planting will be beyond and around the car parking area to minimize its impact.
So, Sanjuti, the ones I was talking about were the ones that currently form a hedgerow along the red line, and they look like they're not there anymore. So now you can have a magnificent view of a scout hut and a car park rather than a row of trees.
I think all the existing trees and hedgerows are conditioned to be retained.
They're not showing on the plan, that was all.
Mistaken. I can confirm that with the landscape officer later on. However, I remember we had a lot of negotiation regarding this, and just to ensure that we get the appropriate planting and these trees to not become, the proposal to not become really an eyesore from the road.
I think, Chairman, I don't know if it's possible, but some sort of reassurance on that would be helpful, because it doesn't show on the plan.
What form of reassurance are you looking at? We have the tree officer's comments in the body of the report, tree and landscape officers. I'm not sure what additional reassurances you're looking for. They're satisfied with the level of screening relative to the building being relocated in the site close to the highway. I'm not sure how we can ask for anything more than that.
So I think Sanjuti said that the trees along the highway were being retained, which sort of matches with the tree and landscape officer's comment. But the plan on page drawing number 2018-0211 and the one 2018-0206C both don't show any trees or any landscaping at all along that front where the road is. Now that might just be the way the plans are drawn, but I'd just like some reassurance.
There is also a supporting document which is called the AMS document. It's available in the website. So the AMS December 2020, it lists all the existing trees and those trees which will be removed, the 17 trees which are category C and U trees. And then it also identifies the areas where the new trees will be planted. So the trees and landscape officers have reviewed this document and they are satisfied with that. So this particular drawing, drawing point C you are talking about, that should be read in conjunction with the AMS document, if that makes sense.
Thank you. So what you're telling me is the plan doesn't show the retention of those trees, but they are being retained. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen Conway.
Thank you, Simon. Yes, I was slightly puzzled by the tree issue and where they were, but I think that's been clarified by Sanjuti, so thank you for that. I mean, I support this application. Again, this is an important community facility, provided we have got the screening and provided we are actually increasing the number of trees here, then I see no reason to object to this application, and I will be supporting it.
Okay, thank you. Andrew Mickleborough.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I think this is yet another planning application tonight that has considerable merit. But I do have 3 questions and comments. The first is on page 198. There's a reference to biodiversity net gain, but no figure is given. Can officers confirm if there's a policy on this? My recollection in other applications is that a figure of 10% has been included. I'm just wondering whether there's any information with respect to that in this instance. The other 2 comments really are sort of suggestions for informatives that we might like to consider. The application provides for 6 secured cycle spaces. Now, given the nature of the activity on this site, I'm just wondering if an informative might be added to suggest that the number of secured cycle spaces might be increased, or consideration be given for increasing that. And secondly, the drawings show that part of the roof might be suitable for solar panels. Might an informative also be considered, suggesting that the applicant explore opportunities for securing funding for solar panels? But otherwise, I'm very, very happy to support this application.
Okay, if I could just ask the latter one. Whilst I support the sentiment of what you suggest about solar panels, we do need to bear in mind this is a heavily wooded site. And I would hate to think we're starting to talk about needing to cut trees down because there's not enough light getting to the roof of the building, which would rather contradict what we're trying to achieve. But there's certainly no harm in it being put in as an informative, because as you know, an informative is precisely that. It is a suggestion that they take that into consideration. It's not no degree of compulsion. So I suspect we'll come to that in a minute, but I think members will be happy to do that, and the same with providing additional cycle storage as well. Okay. The question you had was about biodiversity net gain, wasn't it?
Yes, please.
Help on that, Sanjuti.
There is a standard DEFRA method through which we can calculate biodiversity net gain. I can't remember on top of my head what's the exact number, but once the applicant comes in with a discharge of condition application, we would negotiate, and the council's ecology officer would give his input in determining the exact number of the biodiversity net gain.
All right. Thank you. Malcolm Richards.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. This is certainly a good scheme and has a lot of merit. You referred to it as a scout hut before, and this is going to be a bigger and better scout hut, so I'm in favour of that. My questions are simply for clarification, be understanding what it does. Does it have, at the moment, what does it do for sort of utility supplies like water or electric or drainage or whatever? Does it have anything like that at the moment? Or
again,
does it not, and then it's going to have some? Yeah,
Malcolm, again, this, I'm afraid that is not a planning matter, and I don't think we need to discuss that at the planning committee.
Okay, it was just the drainage bit mainly.
It might be of interest, but it's not relevant to determining this application.
It's in the report.
The provision of utilities is not a matter for us to deliberate on at the planning committee.
But he mentioned SUDs and drainage, that's the point. It's on page 195. I'm just wondering, what does that involve? That was all.
Okay. Sanjuti, could you elaborate on the SUDS issue, please, for Malcolm?
Currently, the building does have utilities connections in terms of light, and the drainage is done through, I think, on site. There are existing I think, cesspits, and it's not really connected directly to the Thames Water at this moment. However, there is a proposal for the Thames Water to extend its lines, and this new building will be connected to the mains. So our drainage officer was requested further information on SUDs and things like that, just to ensure that we have the proper drainage in future.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks. That's all I needed to know. Thank you. I approve of it.
I see Gary's wishing to speak again, but Gary, could you just hold, because Callum, could you confirm if there's others wishing to speak that I can't see?
I only see Councillor Cowan's hand up, Chairman.
Gary, did you wish to make an additional point?
It's one point, picking up on what Pauline said, which I fully support, is, and I welcome the fact that the Tree and Landscape Officer has written a report, but if it's on the website in 2020, I would have thought appropriate that it should have been part of this planning application, then we wouldn't have asked questions on the tree issue. And it goes back to the presentation of the whole documentation. There should be better pictorial representation of the plans we're determining. It would make our life easier and it would simplify the whole process. That's only my observation, but thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Right, I think that's concluded all those who were wishing to speak that I'm aware of. And therefore,
Chairman, Carl Duran has just put his hand up.
Carl, go ahead.
Sorry for that. Just ambushing you there a little bit. Yeah, I just want to make the point that to kind of agree with what Gary just said. Really, when I first looked at this application, I kind of couldn't quite remember where it was, even though it's not far away from where I am. And so I kind of went on Google Earth, and then it was only then I noticed that it was completely covered with trees. The diagrams in the agenda don't quite make that point. I think it just being green, and then it was only then I thought, oh, there must be some trees getting knocked down here. And on that point, I mean, I don't think, again, it's a community benefit, this, and I don't think it's enough to rub it out. But we need to remember that the trees being knocked down and replaced, it's a good replacement rate here, I think. I've not seen one this high for a while, I don't think. But they are being replaced with small trees. You know, it takes a long time for them to recover the benefit of the trees that have gone. So we just need to bear that in mind. But I don't think that's enough to refuse this application. Thank you.
Carl, I would just point out to you that my understanding is the trees that are being lost are those that the trees are usually categorized, I think, A, B, C, and U, and the trees that are being lost are C and U. It's highly probable that some of the U's, that is the letter U rather than the tree name U, by the way. The letter, sorry, the U refers to normally trees that are in exceptionally poor condition and quite possibly dead. So their contribution is probably significantly less, other than for carbon capture and as a home for insects. So I think, we're keeping the better trees. That's the key point here, I think. Sure. And hopefully, if the 57 trees that replace them are appropriately maintained and looked after, that they should add in the longer term. Yeah. All right. Okay. Now, we had the suggestion of a couple of informatives from Andrew, and I think if I try and summarise those, that Callum, we're seeking an informative that encourages the applicant to make future consideration of a solar installation on the roof if it's not unduly shaded, and also an informative encouraging the applicant to make an over provision of cycle storage spaces compared with what is currently proposed. Both of those are purely recommendations. They're not compulsory in any way, they're advisory. So could firstly people indicate whether they would support two such informatives by raising their hand?
I have 9 so far, Chairman.
Right.
10.
Okay. Right. I'm not proposing to have a vote against because it is only an informative. It doesn't carry any legal weight. I now then move on to the recommendation that is laid out from page 194 onwards, and ask members whether they could please indicate whether they support the application in front of them.
That is unanimous.
Right. Okay. Thank you, members. Could you lower your hands? And we now come on to the last item on the agenda, which is on page 217. This is an application in Woodley for a bungalow that I believe used to be, I think it used to be the caretaker's bungalow connected with the school. It's no longer as such, but there is a proposal to have a small extension to accommodate an additional bedroom to allow for carers to stay at the residence overnight, as this provides, it's a residential dwelling for Class 3B for institutional nursing home. I would just point out, members, that I think unless I'm mistaken, every planning committee that we will have discussed tonight and hopefully decided on, every single one of these has had some form of community benefit, whether it's through supporting youth, whether it's supporting a community more broadly as at Twyford, whether it's supporting Scouts, whether it's supporting less fortunate people through the last application here, which probably makes a pleasant change from some of the applications that we're having to determine just for commercial gain. So it's a refreshing change in that sense. So Kieran Newman, Kieran is this is apparently new planning officer. He's certainly a new planning officer to the planning committee, and I've given him a personal assurance that we will be gentle with him this evening. So Kieran, could you please introduce your application?
Oh, good evening. Thank you, Chair. Let me just get up my camera. And I'll just get up my presentation for you too. There we go. Could you please confirm that you can see that?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Kieran.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So this application seeks consent for the change of use of Highwood Bungalow from a residential dwelling, so Class C3, to a residential institution under Class C2 in order to care for vulnerable adults, as the Chair has already mentioned. The application also includes the construction of that single-storey side extension to provide an extra bedroom and bathroom for carers of the residents. The only reason for this being listed to committee is that it's a Woking Borough Council application as well. So the site currently consists of a moderately sized 2-bedroom bungalow style property, which includes a more recently constructed carport located on the eastern flank wall of the building. To the north and west of the site is the adjoining Highwood Primary School. To the east is a number of residential dwellings situated on Fairwater Drive. To the south is the adjoining number 1 Fairwater Drive, which is now part of two dwelling semi-detached arrangement with number 3. So as mentioned previously, the proposals also include the construction of this side extension. Here is the block plan showing it in the top right hand corner here, with the outline of the existing carport to be removed. This is the floor plan outlining the bedroom at the bottom with the bathroom as well. And then these are the elevations too. Here are some images of the application site as is right now. The area, as mentioned previously, is largely comprised of semi-detached and terraced residential dwellings, with the exception of the Highwood Primary School, which is located to the right of this picture here. In regards to noise, the increase in users would be largely minimal, and nuisance from vehicles, particularly during the later hours of the day, would only see a minor change from the vehicle usage of its original use as a residential dwelling. This is due to the day/night rota proposed for the carers, which would include 1 carer in the institution at a time to look after the vulnerable adults in residence. The only exceptional circumstance where there would be more than 1 member of staff is in the case of medical emergency. The environmental officer has also raised no objections to these proposals either. The site benefits currently from an existing vehicle access from Fairwater Drive, which would be again utilised with this current scheme, and it is considered acceptable for access by all modes of transport, particularly in a medical emergency. The Highways Officer has also raised no objections to this either, and has only recommended conditional approval to ensure that parking is retained for the site. So there is a minor policy confliction, as whilst the proposed change of use to Class C2 would result in the loss of residential dwelling, the proposed use is somewhat quasi-residential anyway. And the scheme provides a great social benefit and an essential community facility for supporting vulnerable adults, therefore complying with policy CP2 of the core strategy. In our opinion, this far outweighs the loss of a residential dwelling, regardless of the minor policy inflicted with CP3. So to summarise, proposed change of use from Class C3 to Class C2 is considered acceptable in principle, as a proposal would make a positive contribution to providing the essential community facility to support for supporting vulnerable adults within the borough. The proposed extension to the building would be modest, complies with the borough design guide in every way. There are no neighbouring amenity issues, no objections from any form of consultee, and it's therefore considered to comply with all national and local policies, and is therefore recommended for approval. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. If you could just give us our own screens back, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for again a very quick presentation on what is in fact quite a minor planning application, but would obviously have a major benefit for the vulnerable people who would be homed and supported there. Now, we don't have a ward member present, and we have nobody registered to speak either, so I'll throw this straight open to members. You may wonder why we are even considering this, because we actually have a policy that borough council applications that involve less than 100 square metres of space, that they should be, they don't need to come to planning committee. But the reason this has to come to planning committee, because it's a very small extension, well within the 100 square metres, is of course that it also requires a change of use, and that isn't covered by the exemption. So that's why we're discussing this fairly minor application tonight. And I see Carl being the first to indicate to speak. Carl.
Thanks, Sam. This is about just under 100 yards outside my ward, so I'm not a ward member, but nearly. Yeah, I just want to say that there's no objections from Wadley Town Council on this. There's no comments from ward members or neighbours. It's obviously a great community benefit. Let's just get this through. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Stephen Conway.
Thank you very much, Simon. I agree with Carl. This is an uncontroversial application. There's clearly no one opposing it. And Kieran very succinctly summed up the policy balance between the loss of a dwelling, but the community benefit we're getting from its conversion into something that's really going to bring considerable benefit to vulnerable people. So I think, there's absolutely no reason why we can't go to the vote very quickly on this.
Okay, thank you. Gary Cowan.
Simon, thank you. Again, no real problem with it, just a couple of points. Again, no drawings of the pictures in the plans. I'll make a plea that if somebody gets a camera and goes out and does it for all our plans in the future. How many vulnerable adults and what will their ages be is a general point. And the reason I ask the question is, with respect, vulnerable adults have got quite a wide range of things, and it's in proximity to a school. And what clarify the car parking facilities, because I noticed there's yellow lines on the road. But in principle, I'm going along with it. I'd just like those points clarified, please.
Right. I think just a word of caution that I think the fact that they're vulnerable adults is probably as far as we should be discussing publicly. Could I have some planning advice on that, please?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. And the age and the condition of the occupants isn't relevant, and frankly could change. So you don't need to consider it under this application.
Thank you very much. And Gary's point about the parking arrangements, Kieran, can you just clarify? I think I read that there was one parking space on site. Is that correct?
No, there'll be 2 parking spaces.
Oh, okay.
Before, yeah.
All right. Okay. Any other points anybody else would like to raise? Is anyone else indicating? Carl. Gary, could you put your hand down, assuming you've had your question answered?
Rochelle's hand is
up. Yeah,
up.
it was just one. The proximity.
Let's just finish.
the council will take note of its proximity to a school, the occupants, that's all. I'll say no more.
Okay, all right, thank you. Rochelle.
I think this is a community asset. I think it's the right thing to do for the most vulnerable. To be able to vote on this very quickly.
Yeah, Rochelle, you were very muffled. Would you repeat that, please?
Sorry, would you like me to speak louder like this? Is
That's
this
better.
I think this is a very good community facility, and it's helping the most vulnerable, which is the thing we should be doing in Woking.
Okay, right. Anybody else wishing to speak? I heard an
Abdul.
Abdul, you'd like to speak. Go ahead, Abdul.
At some point.
Hello, Abdul.
Apologize. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I'm a neighboring ward member also from South Lake Ward, Loddon Ward. I fully support, and I don't think we should really waste any more time because it's asset for the vulnerable people in our borough. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Okay, then without further ado, we will put this straight to the vote. Members, application 203344. It's in front of us. There are no objections from anybody. Could you please indicate your support?
That's unanimous.
Okay. Thank you very much, members. We haven't finished, I'm afraid. We have, I don't know whether it's Justin, you'd like to take us through some of the appeal decisions that are appended to your members' update, largely containing, I think, a significant amount of good news for the council in terms of the inspectors general.
Are we turning the YouTube video off at this point? This is confidential information.
I'm not sure it's confidential, but I think where do we stand on this, Callum? That is the formal end of the planning committee, because discussion of appeal decisions is not an agendaed item, is it?
It's up to you, Chairman. It's not an agendaed item. I mean, ordinarily, when we had meetings in the council chamber, the public was still allowed in for this. It is published in the members' update, so it's up to you. Okay.
Well, in the interest of transparency, I'm quite happy that that should continue, but this is, of course, not a formal part of the planning committee. It's not a decision-making process. And as you know, every quarter we do look at the council's performance on appeals, which I'm of the opinion of being increasingly good. It's always been very good, but it's getting better and better. Justin, would you like to just lead us through anything of particular significance in that list?
Thank you. I will. I mean, I'd never take 1 month in isolation, but it has been a good month. So the main ones really, Dinah Close, Spencer's Wood, which was one of the larger speculative applications, which went down on a number of issues. And just yesterday, the Station Road Twyford application, which members will keenly recall, I think.
I think that was I
That's
think
putting it mildly. Yes.
I think that was back in July, where a previous inspector had guided us quite strongly as a council and committee members to giving approval, but we and the officers decided to recommend it for approval, but members were not at all comfortable with it, and I've checked my records. It was rejected by all bar 2 of the members of the planning committee, so it was a member overturn, and that was supported by the planning inspector. And as we said just before the meeting started, I think a couple of planning inspectors need to have a chat to each other, because they seem to be remarkably inconsistent in their determination of some applications. So that was a good.
I think, Simon, it's on the Twyford application, it is fair to say, and should be said, that although it was technically a member overturn, in 2 respects, you could argue it wasn't. The conservation officer very clearly was unhappy with the application, and I think that was really vitally important in persuading the appeal inspector in the end. But he clearly made a judgment that the other appeal inspector had been perhaps eccentric in his view of this matter. And I do utterly understand that the officers felt that on balance they had to recommend approval, given that we had that appeal inspector's report. So I think they did all they felt they had to do, and it was obvious it was a really on balance decision for the officers. So it's just one of those cases where I think we were very fortunate that we got an inspector that wasn't eccentric dealing with us.
I'd like to think that we have a reputation here in Wokingham being an excellent planning committee, and that we discuss these matters very, very seriously, and we have our differences, and we come to the best conclusion we can, and that maybe I hope inspectors might look at the results of our deliberations, might even look at the recordings to see the arguments we put forward, in the same way as judges look at recordings of the House of Commons when trying to interpret what laws they've passed mean. So I think
I find your faith touching, Chris. I'm not entirely sure I share it, but
well, it was good to find a sane inspector for a change.
Yeah. Okay. And just before I go, I think it might just be worth drawing members' attention. I needed to check something that was at a recent meeting, and I checked the YouTube videos, and I was rather surprised that the planning committee meeting I looked at had 7,000 views on YouTube. But,
oh my goodness!
but the average number of people viewing main council meetings is about 60, and so we're obviously we must be providing some interest and possibly even entertainment. But
I think this may be a COVID-related fact.
Or maybe we're better than the Cheshire councils.
Yeah.
Just recently.
That was 60,000, wasn't it?
There's enough hilarity. Thank you all for your perseverance this evening, and thank you to the officers for the presentations tonight that enabled us to come to decisions on each and every one of these. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, they're all applications which have benefits, particularly to individual groups or sectors that certainly deserve those. So with that note, I would wish you all a good night. There is no sign of us resurrecting the planning site visits at this point in time. And just one other point that I am considering after discussion with officers, considering that we may well be introducing some further restrictions on whether members can actually participate in items where site visits have not been attended, because we seem to be out of kilter with many other councils on that. That, you know, if somebody is 10 minutes late for a meeting, we don't allow them to actually participate in the decision. But if it's deemed necessary for a site visit to take place, that we allow people who haven't taken part in the site visit to vote on it. It's obviously not something that we're going to enter into lightly, and obviously all members will have an opportunity to comment on it, both in draft form, and then of course it will have to go to full council for consideration. But it is something I think we need to consider as relevant to the maintaining the high standard of quality decisions that we're making. As if a site visit is deemed essential, that it would be essential for members to attend. But as I say, it's something we are currently considering. I don't propose to discuss and debate it now. It's all been a long evening, and with that,
just a quick question. Can we go on an alternate time if we want to, or if we're familiar with the site anyway?
Anybody, the position currently is you must make your own decisions. But should you go to visit a site, you've got to bear in mind, A, it is unofficial, B, it doesn't give you a right of access to the site, and C, it may or may not be a relevant matter when we come to discuss it. Because if only one member has had an unofficial site visit, that you could argue that puts other members at a disadvantage. But no doubt the person attending would agree that it's actually to the benefit of the committee if at least one person has seen it. But I think it'd be a lot better if we had a clear-cut position on site visits, and that will come forward in due course. Okay, everybody.
Just for clarity, Chairman.
Yes,
very quick one. Looking forward to May. The criteria, I think, for holding that meeting shortly after the elections is as long as we're quorate with people that are still members, then that meeting can go ahead. Is that correct?
That is my understanding, but I will ask for clarification on that nearer the time.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
One final point, Simon. Will, if one is disabled, would that just ensure they couldn't be part of the planning committee?
I think he's gone.
They couldn't attend site visits. Oh well.
One other thing.
Oh well, not to worry. Good night, all.
No, I'm the vice chairman. I'm chairman now. So if Simon's gone, what's your point? What was your point, Gary? What's your point, Gary?
If we start looking into how we handle site visits, will we take into consideration if a member of the planning committee is disabled, or will a disabled member of the council be banned from being on the planning committee because he can't attend site visits because he's disabled?
Okay, I sincerely hope not, but that's an interesting point. And if Simon has disappeared, I will raise it with him tomorrow.
That would violate the equalities laws if we do so.
Yep. Okay. Yep.
I think, Chris, if I can just quickly jump in there, I think, Gary, just to put your mind at rest, I'm sure if a change like that was to happen, an equality impact assessment would have to be conducted to, as you say, to ensure that no individual under any of the categories of the Equality Act was discriminated against.
Yep.
Well, yeah, it would be a good opportunity to get rid of me.
We don't want to get rid of you, Gary.
Volunteering.
Nothing ridiculous. We want you around.
Oh, yes, you do.
Are you? This
Oh,
is
yes, you do.
Panto time, Gary.